Up. Welcome to the Bardic Inspiration Podcast. I'm your host, Brad the Bard, and today it brings me amazing pleasure to be in a room with someone so knowledgeable, probably the most credentialed guy I've had on my podcast, PhD Jiah Pearson Leary. What's good, my man?
What's going on, buddy?
Oh, and I forgot to give my sponsor a shout out. If you guys want to sponsor me, links in the description for my Patreon. Check out Vedinian's stuff. He has some amazing fictional stuff on his website. All that information's below. All right, brother, what's going on?
Not much.
So let me ask you this. You're living in Philadelphia, and honestly, right now, it's a pretty turbulent time to live in the city, coming from a guy on the outside. But you, what's your experience like right now with all the riots and protests and all this stuff?
So we live in the suburbs, so we've been pretty much not around any of that, to be honest. So
that's cool.
Yeah, it's been cool here.
Yeah, that's good to know. Is what we're seeing on the news an accurate portrayal of what's actually going on?
It's hard to tell.
Yeah.
The news, I would just presume that they're showing a representation of what they want to show the world to get more people to watch the news. And that's kind of a cynical view, but that's how I see it. I
don't think you're too far from the truth on that one.
And, from day to day, I don't really know because I don't go in the city that often. So
Nice. And so you work as a neuroscientist for CHOP? Is that
Yep,
right?
I work at CHOP.
Awesome. And so you don't need to actually go to work right now in like the quarantine time. You're able to work from home.
Yeah, right now this is a pretty good point in my career right now where I'm doing a lot of writing. So I do a lot of like grant writing. I write a lot of papers. And so a lot of that stuff I could just do from this office.
Nice.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I still go in the lab occasionally, and we have like a little shutdown procedure going on right now where we're down to like reduced personnel.
Nice. So like the skeleton staff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we go in, wear masks all day, and do our experiments.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
So tell me about like some of the writings you've been doing like lately. I know you mentioned before to me about like studying like some gut biome confidence stuff in rats. Do you want to touch on some of that stuff? 'Cause I think it's that interesting.
Yeah, we go into whatever direction you want to go, but the big overarching theme in my research is looking at how dietary things or how your health or your gut microbiome affects your behavior. So for those that don't know what the gut microbiome is the collection of microorganisms that live in your body. There's a lot in your gut. For instance, there's more cells that are not yours in your body than your own cells, if that makes sense, which is kind of crazy, right? So there's a lot of them in your gut, but they're all over the place on your body. And for a long time, we knew they were there, but we didn't really know what they were doing. And then eventually people started to figure out that they were kind of critical for our health. So in the extreme cases, when that goes wrong, you get things like bacterial infections, which happens. You do Jiu Jitsu, that's a very clear.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Stories.
That's exactly. So that's problematic. But we have these things in our gut called commensal bacteria, and you can think of it like a host symbiotic relationship. They're these bacteria that our body need to be able to thrive functionally. And we know from animal models that you need that for things like development of the immune system and for expression of your normal behaviors. So for instance, if you take mice that have never been exposed to bacteria, these are called germ-free mice, they have reduced anxiety-like behaviors, which is something you can measure in a mouse. So we know that those bacteria kind of contribute to not just your overall general health, but your mental health as well.
How are they never exposed to bacteria? That's interesting.
So you raise them what's called germ-free conditions. A lot of your bacteria that you get are seeded from your mother when you're born. So you're born in kind of a, let's say, it's not as germ-free as we thought it was, but the uterus used to be thought of as kind of like a germ-free environment. And when you give birth, either through vaginal birth or to some extent cesarean section might happen as well, because you touch your mother afterwards, you start to pick up some of the bacteria that's on your mom, and your dad. As you're passed around into the world, you start to pick up that bacteria and it colonizes your body.
That's so crazy.
So with mice, you could just take them and basically in an environment that has no germs in it, everything's sterilized and prevent that colonization from happening.
So you're pulling it like right away, like just tweezing it and put it in the
more or less.
That's crazy. Go on.
All right,
sorry.
cool.
I was just curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great questions. So what I was interested in the lab, so what my overarching research focus is individual differences. So for a lot of time throughout history of neuroscience, when we looked at behavior, we've only looked at we only looked at like who gets a mental illness, right? So there's a field called abnormal psychology. If you've ever taken a psych course, this is like kind of one of the mandatory courses that you take. And when you think about abnormal psychology, it's like, we often think of, in that class, and this is one of the things that really struck me when I was in school, is that I took this abnormal psychology class, and I thought I'd be learning about like, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, all these things. But I also thought I'd be learning about things like, genius or creativity or like the extreme ends, because that's abnormal, right?
Yeah.
But we don't talk about those things that often. And, we know through studies that not everybody that's exposed to chronic stress, for instance, develops disorders like PTSD or anxiety or depression. In fact, only about 10 to 20% of people that get exposed to a traumatic situation in their life or chronic stress develop PTSD. So the vast majority of people aren't developing these things, and we tend to not study them. And so what I'm primarily interested in is the stress component. Why is it that when you stress some people, like for instance, military service or police service or just in a traumatic everyday experience, why is it some of those people don't get PTSD or don't get subsequent disorders, but then other people do get those things? And so I arrived at the idea that the microbiome might be mediating some of these things, because we know that the microbiome can produce these bioactive substances that can affect your body. And if they affect your body, therefore they can affect your brain as it being part of your body.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so what I did was I did a series of studies in rodents, which are kind of the primary way that we model human behavior, right? Because I can't do these manipulations in humans.
Yeah.
And what I was able to show is that when you take a cohort of rats and you look at their gut microbiome before you even stress them, they look exactly the same. But if you stress them for a period of 7 days...
in what way? Like, how are you stressing them?
So we use what's called social defeat stress as a primary thing. And this is an ethologically relevant stressor, meaning that it applies to rats just as much as it applies to humans. And that's important when you're studying animal behavior to make claims about human behavior, I believe. Because, if we do something completely artificial, to a rat, how do we make the generalization that the same behavior would affect a human if the human never is exposed to that behavior? You can kind of do that sort of thing, but I think it's better off to have something like, expose a rat to another rat who's aggressive that, can kind of overpower that rat, and it causes a stress response. It's not too bad. It's not terrible, but, it's sufficient enough to induce stress. And when you have that happen over and over again, that rat that's exposed to the stressor, the dominant rat, starts to get, the stressed rat gets like a subordinate behavior. And some of them get increased depression-like or anxiety-like behaviors, meaning they're socially withdrawn from other rats. They don't, they don't like rewards the way other rats do. It's probably the best way to explain it. And
can you touch on that a little bit? That's kind of like so they're not like motivated to go for like things that would give you like a serotonin like reward.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
Which is like in humans, right? Because that's one of the clear clinical components of depression, is that rewarding things are no longer, you're not driven to pursue rewarding things, or rewarding what things don't give you a reward anymore.
That's crazy.
And so basically we get this cohort of rats like that, and then we get these resilient ones where the stress doesn't affect them at all. More or less. I don't want to say at all, because there are some things we could talk about that down the road.
But they're more resilient.
They're more resilient to the effects of it, so they don't get the social withdrawn behavior, and they're still they still go seek the rewards. And so when I look at these guys, their gut microbiome before I stress them, they don't have any changes in microbiota. They all look the same. They look the exact same as control rats. Yeah. So there's no differences between them. But when I stress them for 7 days and I look at the microbiota, they're clearly different from each other. And so what that's saying is there's something about their non-microbiome system, their body as a whole, which is what I think is the immune system, that pushes the microbiome into one direction versus the other, resilient or vulnerable. Now, of course, what's important here is this doesn't show that the microbiome causes resiliency or vulnerability. If you heard the phrase correlation doesn't equal causation.
Yeah.
Right. So what I did to determine whether it actually caused it was I took microbiota from resilient and vulnerable rats, and I gave them by what's called a fecal microbiome transplant to non-stress rats.
So what is that? A fecal
microbiome transplant.
So you take poop and you switch the poop?
Yeah, exactly.
That's
poop
crazy.
Switches. That's what you do. And this is something humans do. We do this in humans clinically. C. difficile infection in the hospital. one of the best ways to effectively treat it is to get fecal microbiome transplants. So I do this experiment, and what I find is that if I give the microbiome from these stress vulnerable rats to rats that have never been stressed before, they get some of the same behaviors that the stress vulnerable rats also get. So that says that the microbiome can directly cause some behaviors that are associated with like depression, vulnerability. And how that's happening is what I'm, when you asked the question earlier about what I'm currently looking at, what I've been writing since I've been here all the time, it's been, looking at that further.
Man, that's interesting. So let me ask, without the poop transplant, are there methods that the subordinate, like depressed rat, can use to like alter its like situation with its like mental? You know what I mean? Like, is there a way to make it not so depressed so that the reward system comes back online? With rats or with mice, there's various, drug treatments you can give them. For instance, they're responsive to antidepressants like humans, but, also like humans, there's a good, one of the shifts in the field right now is this idea of treatment-resistant depression. So most people aren't very responsive to antidepressants, as you might anecdotally already know. So there's that issue. I suspect there's other ways to do it. For instance, there's a thing called, there's this idea about the controllability of stress, right? And that's the idea that if you can control a stressor, it's no longer impacts you like a stressor. And maybe that's something that happens with the resilient guys, and maybe that's with the resilient humans as well. So we think about things like coping mechanisms. Coping mechanisms is kind of an important phrase in how we assess these individual differences in stress. So for instance, active coping, you kind of see this in these stress resilient guys. When they're being attacked by this big, stronger rat, they do more standing up behavior. They do boxing. They kind of yell at it. You hear these they do these vocalizations, and they can generally run away. They try to resist it. Whereas the passive guys, the vulnerable, they just kind of give up. Yeah, just like...
Yeah. So think about the analogy to humans, right? In humans, you have some people, and you probably see this all the time in your life and friends, right? Is that there's some people that you're like, man, when this guy gets like stressed, he just like gives up. It just hits him right away. Yeah. And then you have other friends who like, they'll fight back, and they'll try to control what's around them. So that's really kind of important. So when you think about like what a human can do to increase their ability to handle stressors, it's learning how to develop really good active coping behaviors and trying to figure out, like, looking at ourselves and see what are we doing this passive coping and how to get rid of that.
That's interesting. So what kind of information in your research applies to like things like PTSD now, like that you found?
So one of the things that I'm really interested in looking at are things like biomarkers of PTSD. And something that seems to be popping out right now from my work and from others are that there are things that are associated with the immune system that might prime somebody towards PTSD, if that makes sense.
Touch on that.
Right. So there are some things with, you have this immune system, right? Your immune system can be broadly divided into two components. One of it's called the adaptive immune system. And this is like, to bring a broad general focus right now, like let's say you're exposed to COVID, your body would create a reaction to that where it would generate antibodies against COVID. So in future exposures, you'd be able to target that and basically get out of your system. Yeah. Right. And then you have this thing called innate immunity, which is recognition of things like, bacteria and things you would be exposed to through during, your evolution as a human or our species. And the interaction of these two systems produces these substances that are called cytokines. Cytokines are also growth factors. And what cytokines do is they help mediate this inflammatory response. When you get too much inflammation, one of the things it can do is affect brain systems that are associated with depression. For instance, think about some of the things that somebody does when they're sick and how being sick sometimes can look kind of like depression. Yeah, no right. Doubt, no doubt. You don't want to leave the bed, you want to sleep all day. Yeah. And there's pretty good evidence now that at least some cases of depression are related directly to overactive inflammation. So your anti-inflammatory system is not able to effectively suppress the inflammation that happens in your life. how do we know that inflammation can cause depression? Well, there's these really good studies that happened by this researcher, this doctor called Andrew Miller, who did these studies where he looked at people that were given interferon therapies. These are therapies that are commonly used to treat like autoimmune disorders. And interferon is a really potent inflammatory cytokine. When you give this to people, people get depression.
What?
So just giving
That's
the cytokines can cause depression.
And where do you find the cytokines in your body?
So they're all throughout your body. So they're
Okay,
produced
okay.
primarily by, so we've thought for a long time that your body had this immune system, right? And the immune system was the peripheral part of your body. By peripheral, I mean not your brain, everything but your brain. And these immune cells would just produce cytokines, and the cytokines would, do things. They'd basically trigger things like they'd have a pyrogenic effect, meaning that they trigger like a rise in your temperature, your body temperature, to kind of help combat viruses.
Yeah, like getting a fever.
Exactly.
Right.
And then more recently, probably in the 10 years, really, it's been appreciated. We know that these things can, under some conditions, get into the brain, and that in the brain, they can affect your neural circuits that are associated with things like depression or anxiety. And that's like another, in addition to the microbiome component of my research, another thing I'm really interested in. And I have this hypothesis that what these cytokines do is that, so when the cytokines get into your brain, they don't just go everywhere when it's related to stress. They seem to be increased. So they can be produced in the brain, and they might also come from the rest of your body, right? And because you have immune cells in your brain.
Yeah.
And these cytokines are not just increased all over your brain. They seem to be localized to areas of the brain that are associated with like depression and anxiety and even memory, things like that.
Yeah, I remember hearing a statistic about like the more stressed and depressed an individual is, the less their ability, the less they are able to like retain memory and stuff. Like they're worse. Like they're intelligent, like their IQ or something even like drops or something as a result of that. That's
Yeah, so your memory is affected a lot by
Yeah.
it. Like depression leads to memory impairments, and it's kind of, so they're tied together because like one of the parts of your brain that's really, there's a part of your brain called the hippocampus, and this is like where your brain, we think, largely forms memories. And that part of the brain, if you impair what's called neurogenesis, so the formation of new neurons in there, you can get depression-like behaviors. Antidepressants in people that are responsive to antidepressants can also get an increase in what's called neurogenesis in that area. So the area, the part of your brain that's important for memory formation is also really important for depression.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Interesting.
So the two kind of go hand in hand.
Oh, we got a comment.
Oh, cool. So Ewan just gave us a comment. So Dr. McNay, he was actually my PhD advisor, and he made a really good point that's useful to touch upon. And then there's this thing called this inverted U shape that happens when you're stressed. And what this means is it's basically it's arousal. So having low arousal can actually be cognitively like not good, right? So like let's say that you have a big test coming up or something, right? And you just don't care. You're apathetic about it. You go in there, you start to write, down the answers. You don't perform as well as if you're a little bit stressed about it, right? Like you want to have that little bit of stress.
Yeah, for sure. Is that the same thing like in competition brain?
Yeah, let's bring it to there too. That's a
Yeah.
great direction. So there's a thing called, so you have these social facilitation effects, and it's kind of linked to this inverted U effect of stress, which is, if you're so first off, it matters on how competent you are. So if you're at a very high level, let's bring it to BJJ, because we talk about that a lot. Let's say that you're a really high level Jiu Jitsu practitioner and you're in a competition, because you prepare for that competition and all these people are watching you and you've got the stress, you're probably going to perform better than if you were just in the gym. And this effect is so prominent. This is why we know, and this is kind of an interesting statistic, is that a lot of world records for things like running and a lot of sports tend to be broken when you're in competition and high level competition. And we think about it, it's because you got both things going for you, right? You're at this high level of, you got a nice amount of stress. So you get that arousal effect that Dr. McNay was talking about. And then you also have the social facilitation effect of people watching you at the same time.
That's cool.
The flip side though is what happens when you have too much arousal.
Yeah.
Right. And then it all falls apart. It goes to
adrenaline
shit.
dump.
Yeah. The adrenaline dump, basically, and that's what happens when, let's say that you're in way over your head at something, or not even that you're in over your head, but you perceive yourself as being in over your head.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's probably what matters more for people.
Yeah. Well, let's put it in a frame that kind of both of us know that's not jujitsu. What about like stage fright when you're doing a performance, maybe for a group of people that's larger than what you're used to?
That's a great example. So the first time that I ever performed, whatever, sang in front of people was, honestly, I was pretty old. I was like in my early 30s. And I went to this open mic, and I had prepared my ass off for this thing. I had like 3 songs selected. They're all like 3 original songs. And the first song had this like crazy falsetto part in it, right? And so I get up there, and like when I was in my basement, I could crush it, man. I can like record myself, look back to it, and I like super confident, and I'm like, this is great. This is gonna be good. And then I get up there, and my hands are so clammy and everything. I start playing the guitar. I drop my pick like right away.
Yeah.
Pick it up. I forget the lyrics to like the first verse, and then I get to this. There's this big falsetto part in the song, and my voice is just cracking so bad, like prepubescent level cracking, and it was
sounds familiar, man.
Yeah, atrocious. Tunnel vision. You know what I'm talking about?
100%, dude.
You just see.
I've been there.
Yeah,
I've been exactly where you're describing.
Yeah,
dropping the pick on the first song.
Oh man, and it's like, oh shit, yeah. And then it just goes downhill and downhill, and it's like, and that's a good example when you have too much arousal.
Yeah.
And what you need is, so then the other question is like, what are the strategies to reduce that? And this affects everybody, right? Because we all have to like public speak kind of occasionally, or do things that, are arousing, and, doing it, practicing it. So one of the things I learned from that moment right off the bat is I was like, man, the only way I'm gonna get over this is if I perform more and more and more. And after I perform, I like reflect about what I did, and I try to figure out how to improve, and I keep making goals. And like, honestly, now I get more of the social facilitation effect. I feel like when I perform, and it feels more like, a lot of this because I have a fantastic band. They're amazing musicians. So that's super helpful because, I know I have this like rock behind me. And when I'm up there, I feel like I do better than if I was just in the basement practicing.
Yeah.
So like the arousal point is optimal, and I get the social facilitation effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's super cool. It's funny how you mentioned like the band kind of boosts you, and that's where you get like the situation where the sum is greater than the parts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, it's true. And I love that. I think that's like an important thing for humans in general, is having that like, tribal influence thing, like having your people, and then, you all kind of boost each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, that's powerful stuff. So, let's kind of talk about your band a little bit. I was jamming some Spooky Garden or Spooky Forest on the way up here. You have a song called Find a Way that's on YouTube. That's the one that I believe is linked in the description. Definitely check it out. Dude, it's like just like the Black Keys. Like I put Black Keys on like right afterwards. So I'm like, probably... man, I gotta hear more of this vibe.
Similar reference we probably had when producing and mixing it, I think came up.
That's super cool. What would you describe your style as, and like kind of what influenced you to do this genre, if you will?
Man, I don't know. That's a hard question. I don't know. I don't know if there's any like what specific things. I feel like it's almost impossible because it's like post hoc to describe what influenced you. Like what influences somebody to become a rapper or to become like a metal guitarist or become, it's hard for me to like conceptualize that.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like it's an extension of, like music is really an extension of science to me. They're like the same thing in my brain. Is that they're like they're creative and it's constant problem solving.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I just got attracted to this specific style, I guess, of music. Just like for whatever reason, I'm attracted to these specific scientific questions.
Yeah. Oh man, that's cool. So can you tell me, have you ever kind of combined the two, like your actual career with like your music? Like,
no,
there's no overlap.
There's no overlap, and not only that, they're
like you studied like I wonder like this is gonna cause this emotion if I play this chord this way.
No, and they're antithetical to each other.
Yeah.
Like honestly, anytime that I spend when I'm the best scientist is when I'm not doing music. When I'm the best musician is when I'm not doing science.
Hell yeah, dude.
And I honestly think it's and I think that just is the parallel that the two things have. Like for instance, I can be really into like sports or exercise and do science or music really, well. But science and music are so similar that it's like they're like tapping from the same reservoir. And when I pull from one reservoir, it like takes from the other one at the same time, you know? And it's
no, I definitely could see how you would make that connection.
yeah.
That's cool, especially because like you're in like R&D, like so you need to have a creative mind in your research in neuroscience, which is the same thing. Like you need the creativity to create good music.
Yeah, you do. It's the same thing. And it's like I don't know, it's one of the things like I think one of the misconceptions of science, you know, you might not have it, you know, but I definitely hear it from people is that people think that there's this like, you know, I think sometimes the science is more linear than it is or more straightforward. That's almost like, you know, like the rules are just implicit and you do that. But it's like, it's so, I think science above and beyond anything is social and it's creative. And those are like the two things that you need to be a really good scientist. You know, you need to have like a good grasp for other people and other people's ideas. And there's a creative component to it. And music's the same thing, right? Like to be a great musician, you know, I tend to think like we overplay the idea of the singular musician sitting in a cabin somewhere writing a song and nobody, you know, and like that being like their whole aura and everything is that. But in reality, it's like, yeah, they do that. And then they go back home and then they bring it to like a producer who helps fine tune it and then a mixing engineer. And then they get some A&R people in there to help select the best song or change a little thing. And then a mastering engineer and then like social media people. Like it's always team based, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And science is like that too. Like you can have a great simple idea, but I think that the best scientists are the ones that also are able to take that idea and be like, you know, okay, I'm good at this, but I'm not good at this, and I'm not good at this. So let's find the people that are good at those things and create more of a collaborative network off of that. And then you just build and build and build on that.
Yeah, sounds like IT too. Like,
Is it? Yeah.
You know, I used to work in like networking and security, and it's the same thing. It's like, man, I'm not a Mac guy. I'm so happy you are.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you download this weird? This isn't an executable. What is this? That's super cool though. To think about that from that perspective. So like with that in mind, where are you in the collaboration with like a lot of the research that you're doing? Mm-hmm. Like what is your task versus other people's tasks that, you know, make it a productive thing in the end?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think that I tend to be, my strength is an idea person, I guess, which always sounds stupid to say, but it's probably true. Is that I think my strength usually within the network that I exist in science is usually as, you know, somebody who is pretty good at like piecing together things to find ideas, and then B, assembling teams of people to help make those ideas a thing. You know, and other people, different things. Like some people are very protocol driven, like really good at like a technical detail of a specific thing. I'm more like global and trying to find all the things to fit together because I see things as like, you know, I'm more of like an overarching system, almost like a project manager. You know, I feel like tends to be my role.
That's cool. But you actually do get to do some hands-on stuff.
Yeah, I do hands-on stuff all the time. Pretty cool. So I do both. I do hands-on stuff. And
I think that's like a really important thing. You sent me that Quora thing with Jordan Peterson answering a bunch of questions.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things that he there was a similar question that he had, and it was like, do as much like in your career, where like you're touching things instead of telling other people to touch things, or something like similar to that.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Like you're assuming both roles, and that's got to be like a super invested position that makes it really fulfilling, you know? It
does in a way. You know, it's you know, I like to it's similar because we're going to keep doing this, I'm sure, throughout this. Is going back to the music thing.
Oh, 100%.
Is that with the music thing, I don't like just like, I love writing songs, but I also love mixing. I love doing the engineering. I love learning how microphones work and, you know, trying to, you know, signal routing and everything, sampling, how keyboards work, how synthesizers. Like, I need to know every detail of it. I wish
we were doing this podcast in your like jam
studio
space. Yeah, dude, because it's cool down there. He has like all the guitars.
It's pretty rad.
So cool.
But it's yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's like the ultimate experiences in life often have to do with your capacity to be hands-on with your own ideas and not just pawn them off onto somebody else.
Yeah. Extreme ownership.
Yeah, it kind of is. The Jocko quote.
Yeah, dude. Hell yeah, dude. I love that guy. But 100%, I feel like with my podcast, like I used to work with like a lot of people, and I was like, oh man, like how do I get this to do this? Like, can you just like manage this part for me? And it's like, as you can see, sometimes things go wrong, but I like I'm pretty resilient in the way that I'm resourceful, and I can figure out like, what do we have? We can make this work, and that's why we were only a little late instead of 3 hours late because I didn't have to go back home for this.
So it's I think it's important too, because it helps you make what I think is a fatal flaw in most people's lives, which is this capacity to like have a good idea but not understand the limitations of that idea. And this is so like you can assemble an idea, right, that logically makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, but in reality, there's no like once you actually dig into the weeds of it a little bit, none of it makes sense at all. Right. And this is like, I think something that humans are like fundamentally not very good at doing, which I think about a lot, is we're like really good at logic.
Yeah.
Right. So we're really good at like, if this, then that.
Yeah.
You know, but you can make absurd claims with logic, though, that have no what's called soundness to it, meaning that the facts are completely wrong. Right. So you can like convince yourself of all this crazy shit, which people do all around the world. And we know that like now more than ever in this country is that we have these extreme sides that pop up. And, you know, my beliefs, some are more right than others, but you know, you can talk to somebody else and somebody might say that my side is all, you know, full of shit. But people basically have access to the same information, but they assemble it in completely different ways and arrive at different conclusions. And those conclusions are probably fine logically, but it's like their information is wrong. We're like pulling from the wrong set of information.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
That's interesting. Do you think I remember hearing a statistic that like there's a not negligible number of people in the world in like and in America, like I guess specifically maybe is where the statistic came from, but that have like a lower IQ than the military will like accept. Like you can't get into the military unless you meet like a certain criteria, like on the ASVAB. And you know, like maybe I'm gonna just guess like I think it's 1 in 10 people can't do that, can't match that. So that's 10% of the humans like, in America. So like, do you think what do you think the logical mindset that they have is like in some of the tasks that they're able to do because maybe they're not capable of becoming neuroscientists, you know?
Yeah. So it's like, all right, so here's one of the biggest. So first off, one of the biggest misconceptions I think about my sort of job, and I think like, you know, jobs in general that vary across spectrums is like, I think in raw intelligence is maybe not the biggest contributing factors to success in a thing, A. And then B, when we talk about things like IQ, you know, IQ is a very specific thing that was designed at a specific time to be able to weed out certain people from their participation in formal education. And so we've relied on this idea of IQ for a long time, but like, what is intelligence? You know, like when you try to define that, can you really reduce the sum of a person's ability to, you know, to know things about the world to a standardized test? So there's issues with these tests. One being that they're culturally biased often. So like formal Stanford Binet IQ tests, we know are culturally biased towards white people, you know, more or less. And we know that there's issues with these tests in terms of their predictive value for your performance later on in life. So IQ tests are basically normal IQ tests are like standardized to, let's say 100 arbitrarily, right? And then it's like one standard deviation is like 110 versus 120 versus 130. And so the extreme end of that spectrum, we have people that are like, you know, that are both, right? Where you have a high IQ plus you happen to be a high achiever. And this might be like the Albert Einsteins of the world. You know, people try to go back in time and try to figure out what like his IQ was. Or people, we don't know. And also the reality of the situation is that when you look at predictive measures of how successful you are in life, having a little bit higher of an ability to score well on these tests is predictive of things in life, but that stops at around 120, 130. Also around that region, you lose creativity. So scoring higher on IQ test also makes you a little bit more creative, apparently, or it's related to higher creativity, but around 120, that falls away. And we think that has to do with linearity of thinking. Maybe somebody at 160 is more of a linear thinker than somebody at 120. So you can't like reduce the sum of a human being's performance in life to like a formalized IQ test. The downside to this too is that it probably is measuring some sort of serious construct. And we know this because of twin studies. So twin studies are like one of the coolest things that I think scientists have done to be able to probe human behavior. And for a long time, we thought that there was this division between, we've heard this, like, is it environment or is it
nature versus nurture?
Yeah, nature versus nurture. There's a psychologist, I think his name's Stephen Gould, that came up with this idea, an evolutionary psychologist guy, that it was nature via nurture, which I think is a good way to look at it. So it's like your nature will present itself and will probably be pretty dominant. And then depending on your environment, certain things will be expressed or not. So you might have schizophrenia susceptibility genes, but if you don't get the right exposure to things in life, you might not develop schizophrenia. So basically, where are we going with this? It's so easy to get sidetracked in these things. Yeah, so these twin studies have told us really remarkable things, right? So if you take identical twins that have never met each other and you put them across the country and you put them even into, like, you know, you differ their socioeconomic status a little bit, and then you give them, when they're adults, IQ test, they look almost identical still. So their IQ doesn't change even though they never met each other. So you can parse out the effect of a shared environment and look at just their genetics, and they're super similar to each other, which is really cool. And a lot of behavioral traits and everything are kind of similar to each other as well in these guys. You know, so intelligence is a really tricky thing to measure. We know that it's to some degree, you know, culturally biased, and that to some degree, you know, having too high of an IQ might not help you as much as having just a little bit higher than average IQ, and that there's a genetic component of it.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Do you think that, like you were saying, like the higher end of the IQ thing kind of like is first I need to know this to make this assumption. Like, if someone has autism, does that mean they might score higher on the IQ thing? Like, are they higher on like a spectrum of intelligence?
It could be. So it depends. So there's like
depends on like what they're specifically good at.
So there's autism is so difficult, right?
Yeah, dude.
So autism has so we call it a spectrum. It's like a spectrum disorders, right?
Yeah.
Like autism spectrum disorders. And that might have changed in the past couple of years. You know, it's one of those things that's always changing. And what happens is that we pool a bunch of different disorders that are hard to quantify into the specific category. And oftentimes they don't have genetic correlates of it that we know of. You know, there's recently researchers have gotten pretty good at identifying like single like mutations that maybe just a few people have that might classify them to a new subset of a neurodevelopmental disorder that could be construed as autism. So because there's so much heterogeneity of the way we diagnose autism and what autism is, there's some people that are, you know, that have autism where they have such difficulties navigating life, you won't even be able to detect where those preservative sorts of levels of intelligence are. But definitely there's like a savant syndrome sort of aspect that often gets quantified as being autism, where some people have this perseverative interest in a specific thing that leads to such intense practice of that thing that they develop mastery of this thing that in a way that blows the mind of like anybody to see, like Rain Man level stuff, right? You know, and some people also have brain situation. I mean, that's a good example. The guy who inspired that he was missing this part of his brain called the corpus callosum, which basically connects the two hemispheres together and allows him to talk back and forth. And this guy had you know, from what I recall learning about him, was had the ability to like pick up a phone book, read through it, and then you can be like, what page is this thing on? He would
Get
go
the
to
hell
it.
out of here.
Yeah. Remarkable.
Wow. Wow, like photographic memory kind of shit.
Right. Yeah,
Man.
which seems to happen in some people.
Wow. And that's like high end of the spectrum kind of stuff though, where this stuff occurs.
Yeah, so it was, you know, he had other difficulties in life. Like I believe he lived with his mom or his grandma his whole life, and they had to take care of him forever. So, you know, there's that component of it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, so that's the other thing about intelligence. Like in that way, it's like, was he intelligent? You know, are you intelligent if you can solve a very specific problem, but you can't take care of yourself from day to day?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is kind of what I wanted to touch on before I asked about the autism thing. Is like if you're really high end, like I can speak on this from a perspective. I've never had an IQ test, but I'm probably like maybe a little higher than average.
Yeah,
or
likewise.
whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whatever I am, it doesn't really matter. I'm a hard worker. You know what I mean? I grind. That's how I get good at stuff. But I know people who have high IQs, And sometimes like the people, like those people that have really high IQs are more socially awkward. And me, I feel like I have really good like social intelligence, if that's a thing. And I feel like that because like I'm a little higher on the like higher than average on the IQ thing. It gives me the ability to, you know, I can retain a lot of information. I can run a podcast pretty good because I know how to have good conversations. But at the same time, I'm able to go into social situations with confidence as well, and kind of have empathy with people quickly and kind of hit it off with people well. And I feel like that's another reason that I'm a good musician too. Do you feel like you can relate to that?
Yeah.
Because I know like you're a personable guy. Like you can't be too far off of that.
Yeah, the
as,
best
like,
musicians are
temperament.
empathetic, in my opinion, because they're able to read the room. They're able to read their whoever they're playing music with and understand how something's going to be received. You know, and I think that, you know, and this still brings upon like the how to define intelligence. To me, intelligence is to be able to solve practical problems that are appropriate for the domain that you live in. You know, and it's like you're a social guy, you like doing social things, and for you to navigate that world, like you need an intelligence that allows you to do that. Whereas somebody else might be a really introverted, keep to yourself person, and for them having the capacity to focus on a singular domain, like maybe they just want to sit in the room and program all day, and that's what is adaptive for them as a person is different. So it's like intelligence can be different depending on the person, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there's more important things than intelligence per se. I think you probably need to have like, you know, let's presume for a minute that the IQ test does tell you something useful. I think you probably are better off being a little bit higher than average, you know, and I think there are studies to support that scoring a little bit higher than average on formal IQ tests is associated with an increase in, you know, the amount of wealth that you generate throughout your life, things like that, job performance. I don't think the effect's super huge, but I know the effect is there, and who knows, you know, what causes what in that situation.
Yeah.
But I think
so many
factors, but I think so much more, you know, other things that are important are personality traits that you hit upon.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the Big Five before?
Big Five, yeah.
Right. So that's one of the
Was it
important ones.
neuroticism, conscientiousness, agreeableness, industriousness?
No, but I do think that's important. We'll talk about that later.
That's part of conscientiousness.
Openness.
Yeah, openness is the creativity one.
Yeah.
And then I don't know the last one.
We got extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness.
And you said not industriousness.
Nah. But let's talk about industriousness and efficacy.
Extroversion.
Extroversion. That's it. That's the one. All right. So let's break those down. So first off, extroversion is now like pretty contested. There's a phrase that everybody loves, especially on like dating profiles and shit nowadays, which is called ambivert. Have you ever heard that phrase?
No, I don't know.
And this is the capacity to be able to express introversion as much as extroversion. So for instance, let's look at salespeople.
Like ambidextrous, ambivert.
Yeah, kind of like you know how to go back and forth. And so there's a Wharton School of Business study that was conducted in about 20 years ago. It's probably like 10 years ago, where it used to be the case that we thought that salespeople, the best salespeople, the ones that perform the best, were extroverted. And that makes sense, right? Because it's like the idea that you have in your mind of the car salesman or something, right?
For sure.
That probably used to be the case. The problem is that there used to be an asymmetry of knowledge between the buyer and the seller. So it used to be the case that you go into a car lot and you'd be like skeptical of what the guy has to sell because you know about lemons, you know about shit like that. And what happens is that they have an asymmetry of knowledge. The seller knows information you don't know as a buyer. That's completely gone nowadays, right? Because nowadays there's things like Carfax and there's the internet. Like me as a buyer, I know as much as the seller about the thing that I want to buy if I'm a smart buyer. So now there's like a loss of asymmetry of information between the two.
And there's
fields.
definitely like still like not so smart buyers that are not doing the research. They're just like, oh, I just want my thing.
They slip through, absolutely, and that does happen, and they still get swindled. But it's like it's harder than it used to be. You know, it's harder. And one of the things that we found, what's good about assessing salespeople for how personality traits reflect performance is that you have a very clear metrics for how they perform. And that's how much they sell, right? So you can just be like, here's this person, they sold this much last year, and here is how, and here's their, you know, how much extroversion they have, how much introversion. And what we found more recently is that the extroverts don't perform the best. The introverts don't perform the best. The people that score someplace in the middle perform the best. Right. So the people that are connecting with buyers enough to make sales are right in the middle. And I think that's kind of like what we learned from that information where we need to revise the Big Five is that you don't just want to have high extroversion. You want to have context specific extroversion. So like right now I want to be extroverted, right? Like right now I want to sit here and we're having a conversation and I need to initiate all the extrovert cues and everything and like, you know, talk and like not be withdrawn. Otherwise it's going to be the most boring thing. It might still be boring, but it'd be the most boring thing, right? But then you also need to have the capacity for self-reflection that comes from introversion, right? Like the ability to like sit and just reflect and be content with yourself and think about, you know, things without having to just yap, without thinking about what you're saying.
Yeah.
So we got that component of it. I think probably one of the biggest predictors of success in that big five has been considered as conscientiousness.
Mm-hmm. Isn't conscientiousness the one that's tied to IQ though?
Yeah, conscientiousness is tied to IQ, but also it's tied to, you know, to me, it's, when we think about empathy, I think about like conscientiousness more than anything, right? And then you can subdivide things like, you know, have you heard of the idea of like empathy is not necessarily like the best thing in all situations?
Yeah, I mean, I had this conversation with Andrew, my black belt, on the podcast I did with him, and I maybe it was him. It was a Jiu Jitsu guy for sure. But I was saying how I have a lot of empathy myself. Like, you know, I'm a musician, and you know, I can put myself in other people's shoes pretty easily, and that's what makes me sociable. But when I do competition, it's hard for me to turn that switch off because you need to kind of not care about the person you're fighting. That's why I never do research against the guy I'm fighting.
So you don't develop
exactly, because I'll start caring, like, oh, like if I find him like on Instagram and then I'm scrolling, I'm like, oh, he has a kid and a cute dog. Oh, this guy should win. He's a better guy than me, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Because I'm comparing my behind the scenes with his highlight reel kind of thing, and it's like a huge. I know how my brain works in some ways, and that's one way. So I'm like, I don't want to know the dude's name, bro.
So, all right, I think that somebody's asking, somebody's saying, someone here was the thing is like to the phrase about empathy not always being good. And I think it's like, so there's different ways that we can operationalize empathy. I know you well enough to know that you have high emotional empathy.
For sure.
Right. So I know that you feel like what somebody else is doing. You can read a room really well. And it's not even that you read it consciously, I think, but you just like, you know, when people are like sad, like you feel it for them and stuff. And you have that like in spades. You're one of the people I know that has that more. And that's why you have a podcast and you do all this stuff, right? But the way when empathy becomes a problem, and so this is all based, there's a researcher named Paul Bloom who's done a lot of this work. And that's the idea that first off, we need to dissociate what we normally think about empathy. And let's make three new subdomains here. One is emotional empathy. And that's what you just said. One is conscientiousness, or not conscientiousness, I'm sorry, compassion. Ooh. So oftentimes when somebody says they're empathetic, what they actually mean is they're compassionate, right? Like how many times do you know somebody who wants to like, you know, donate all the time or like, you know, do charity events, but then you see them around other people and you're like, I don't think they're really like getting that the experience like you get. You know what I'm saying? Like some people like that they reflect the emotions of the people around them. Yeah. Other people just want to be good, but they don't understand. So that's compassion. And now this is where it becomes tricky, and this is called cognitive empathy. Have you heard that phrase before?
No.
So cognitive empathy is the ability to basically mind read. So a really good bully has very high cognitive empathy because they fucking know. They like know.
All right. So Jiah did not tell me about his crazy teleportation machine that he had in the cut there. So we're down on the couch now. We had some technical difficulties. Thanks, Comcast. So now we're hardlined in, and everything should be good. So where were we? It's gone. It's catching up right there.
Oh, we had that little latency on it.
Yep, that's how.
All right, cool.
That's how. It should do.
So I think we decided that where we left off at was talking about is coming to a new understanding of what we think about when we think about empathy, and that empathy isn't just as simple as we've made it out to be, as being just the capacity to feel somebody else's feelings. That's a specific type of empathy, and that's what's called emotional empathy. Whereas usually what people are referring to when they talk about empathy is actually compassion. You know, and you can be a compassionate person and have no empathy, to be completely honest. And then we were talking about bullies for a little bit before we left off, and how, like, you know, something that makes a really effective bully is the capacity to have cognitive empathy. So to know like what gets at another person. You know, so
to know what causes someone to emote a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like what causes someone to be sad or someone to, you know, be defensive. And you were saying that that's also good quality for a CEO or someone.
Yeah, it's also a good leadership quality too, right? So like harnessing the right hands, harnessing the right hands, it's a very good quality because it makes sure that it basically allows you to really understand what your subordinates need to be effective.
Yeah,
you know,
that makes like a sense. Like I'm thinking like my boot camp days, like something that we would do is a way to maybe like get people to be more motivated would be to do like the cadence stuff where like you're marching and you're singing a song while you do it. And like the more energy the guy calling cadence has, he can invoke you to be more motivated and like enjoy it more and not hate your life so much in boot camp. So that's an interesting thing there. And I guess like as a bard myself, if I'm gonna inspire someone with my music, that might be cognitive empathy.
Absolutely.
'Cause I'm causing someone to feel a certain way if I'm playing Johnny Cash Hurt or something.
Yep. Yeah. As a scientist, you have to have, the same things. Like we have to do a thing where we have to write like grants all the time. That's like how, as like a scientist in the modern age, you basically you live or die by your capacity to get people to give you money. And that requires having like, the capacity to understand what the person reading the grant wants to hear.
Yeah.
Writing papers are like that. I think good authors probably have the same sort of capacity as well. They know that if I write this a certain way, it's going to have this effect. Good directors, maybe.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. Can you kind of touch on like maybe some strategies that you have writing grants? I'm just kind of curious, like what's some language that you might use? Just touch on it briefly.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
That's a good question. I think it's actually there's things there that are applicable for everybody. I think so. Grant writing is a very specific style of writing. And so like when you write a grant, you're basically asking people to give you money, and you want them to have faith that you're competent enough to do the research and that the research is important and needs to be done, right? And so you have an audience that needs to read that, right? And to some extent, like you have to know that audience, and you do know it ahead of time. So for instance, you can look up who might be reviewing your grant out of a pool of people if it's on a federal level grant.
Like on a board or something.
On a board. But then there's like, there's intricacies to it because there are private foundation grants as well. And sometimes they might be reviewed by a technical person who knows stuff at the level you do, a non-technical patient advocate type person, like somebody, let's say you're writing a grant for the National Brain Cancer Association, arbitrary name. You might have a patient who, or an ex-patient or the family member who might also be reviewing the grant, so they don't know anything about what you're doing. They just know how it relates to them, and then you might have a chairperson who maybe has probably some degree of scientific knowledge about it, but who makes the ultimate decision about what gets funded or not. And so your language goes into making sure that people understand what you're trying to say. So you have to have strong command and mastery of not just language, but the ability to understand what people want, what they want to hear. And it's an art. I suspect that the best scientists are also extremely good at doing that because the ones that aren't get selected against. They're weeded out and they're no longer in science. So.
Yeah. That's funny. I remember hearing, Michio Kaku, the theoretical physicist guy.
Yep.
It's funny. He kind of talks about like what you were saying about the weeding out. With physicists, they do the same thing. Like they make it. It's a difficult process so that you don't want shitty bridges. So you weed those guys out. Try to weed it out, that kind of stuff out early.
Science weeds out a lot of people because and to be a scientist, you basically get a PhD, right? Like that's almost like a necessary precondition. And the PhD basically is around 5 years, but the way I thought about it when I was doing it is that they're going to give it to me if I just do the work, right? Like if I show up, if I do the work, if I have ideas, the courses don't even really matter. You just do the work, and then you write a thesis at the end. And as long as everybody's happy along the way, like there's kind of defined goal, right? So there's like ways you can like branch off and not do so well, and you have setbacks and things. But at the end of the day, like when you get into the PhD program, they want you to get the PhD. They want you to finish and leave, go be a successful scientist. But so that weeds out people right off the bat, right? So, there's definitely a lot of people in my cohort that dropped out, or after they did finish, they're just like, screw this, I'm just going to go do something else, which is probably smart on their part. But then you have this like postdoctoral experience, which is what I'm in now. And I've been doing that for 7 years at this point. And that's like the period where you need to, there's not really a defined point for how you get to the next step, which would be a faculty position, like a professor somewhere. And so that weeds out a lot of people as well. You know, so it's like, and then once you get to a faculty position, you basically want to get tenure. And so tenure takes a period of time that also weeds out people, because you either get it or you don't, or, you know, if you don't, you're basically gone. You need to go somewhere else. So
and then restart that.
And then restart that. So, you know, it's stressful, but it's also, you know, the way I think about a lot is, you know, fundamentally my brain is inclined towards like creativity and art.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I do music, you know, but it's, I never saw that as like a viable option in life. You know, it's whereas like science, it hits all the same things, and it, you know, it's something that theoretically I can make money off of at some point, but, you know, and also do the creative things that I want to do anyways. You know?
Yeah. And you're helping people too. Like,
Yeah, there's that component of it, which is
yeah.
cool, you know.
But I think that's like that was a big thing for me. Like with my career in IT, like I don't want to touch on this too much because this is about you.
That's all right.
But I remember like in my early part of my career, I was doing a lot of hands-on things, and I was doing a lot of like client interfacing things, and that's the stuff I preferred, like going on site and, you know, rack and stacking servers, this, that, and the other thing, and then discussing things with the clients, like, oh yeah, like how do you guys do this, that, and the other thing? Everything's working for you? Is there anything I can help you with while I'm here? This, that, and the other thing. In the later part of my career, I was doing a lot of like cubicle work where it's just like, oh, let's just do care and feeding. Like I'm not talking to anyone. It was just soul crushing.
Yeah.
And I feel like I need to feel like I'm doing something directly with to help people. Like it doesn't even need to. I can fool myself and make myself feel like that without actually doing it. Like I can do pseudo work that feels that way, just being on site sometimes, just like with the old lady that needs her fucking, you know, keyboard unplugged and plugged back in kind of thing. That feels better than doing 8 hours of like, you know, maintenance.
Right. Which makes sense for you because you're the empathetic extrovert that we were talking about, right?
Exactly, man. That's so interesting with what you were saying though. So let me ask, with what are some like things that you've researched that you found like that, like you've new findings that you've like gathered and that maybe that you've integrated with your life?
Yeah, so it's, you know, that's a great question, and that's, you know, I approach research selfishly in an extent, right? It's like I want to help people too, but, you know, my overarching goal through my existence has always been to be the most optimal and effective person I can be.
Yeah. So you're trying to build like the Iron Man suit.
I wish. You know, I often think I should have gone into engineering instead, so I could do that sort of stuff, you know, or at least, but it's, you know, it's, you know, I have these like kind of overarching goals in my life is to be efficacious and to be industrious, right? Efficacious is really like, to me, is the most defining quality of my mind of like what constitutes.
What is that word? I don't know that word.
So efficacy is kind of a science term, right? So efficacy is something that we think about in terms of a drug having its desired effect, but you can apply it to humans as well. You know, I think it's like the most important trait a human being can probably have is to be efficacious, and that's to be able to have the desired effect that you want on the world. Now, what is that desired effect, right? I think that it's an effect that usually has something that's in your own rational self-interest. For instance, you know, if I want to own a company and have that be an effective company or something, right? If I'm just like a selfish dick to people all the time, I'm not going to be a very effective leader, right? You know, so I need to do things that make me efficacious to be able to have this effect on this company or have this like goal that I want to achieve, right? And so to bring that back to the research question, what I'm always thinking about through my research is what are some strategies that I can use to make me a more efficacious human being, you know? And it's the microbiome one is, you know, obviously something that I went into hoping I would find something like a probiotic. Have you heard of those before?
Yeah, probiotic, like yogurt or like the drinks that have like the active cultures.
Absolutely. And the problem with those things is they really have barely any effect.
Really?
You know, and it's
the whole thing's a gimmick. Is that what you're telling me?
It's kind of so. Part of the problem is that a lot of those bacteria, they're basically killed before they even get to your stomach.
Oh, geez.
A or B, a lot of the commercially available probiotics you buy from the store, they're already dead anyways.
Oh, wow.
So it could be the case that there's like bacterial like cell wall components or metabolites that are inside of there that might have a beneficial effect, but the bacteria probably aren't recolonizing your own gut microbiome. And if they are, it's short-lived. for instance, when you stop taking those probiotics, your body usually goes back to whatever it wants to be at. And that's kind of what I've learned through my research is that, your body has a state that it wants to be in, a homeostasis that's largely contributed to your immune system and your genetics. We used to think it was genetics, but I think more and more we're realizing it's your immune system. And your immune system is obviously function your genetics, but your immune system is programmed throughout your life. So throughout exposure to different viruses and bacteria, and throughout things like your environment in general, like the different pathogens you might be exposed to. And some of those.
What about like your habits as far as like being athletic versus sedentary?
Yeah, exactly. It's a big part of it as well, right? So like, we know that exercise is like one of the most beneficial things you could do for your mental health. So when you look at like meta-analysis studies, which are studies that pile together a bunch of different studies and tries to come to like a really strong statistical conclusion about the effect of something, exercise is probably the most potent antidepressant thing that we have. It's good for treatment-resistant depression, has long-lasting effects because it's changing behavior, which is really with depression what you want to do, right? Like depression, you need to change behavior. So, of course, the issues you need to get people to be like, when you're it's hard to tell a depressed person to go exercise, right? So bringing that back to like what I've learned about things, it's that you're not going to be able to just pump your body full of probiotics if you want to change something about the gut microbiota. You need to change something about your body in of itself, and we don't know what those things are yet. I suspect that they have to do with your immune system and genetics, and also your environment. So we definitely know from studies that you can cause like kind of longer changes to your immune system by exercising and by and also by microbiome composition. You can get towards a healthier microbiota composition, which I use that term loosely because we don't really know what that is. That might vary from person to person, but through exercise. Exercise really, in my opinion, so it's not just exercise per se. Like exercise is a means to an end. And the means to that end is to have low body fat and high lean body mass. Right. And that's accomplishable through exercise. So there's this idea that, can you have a lot of body fat and still be healthy? I personally don't think so. I mean, I think you can be okay, but I think you're going to be at your most healthiest when you have minimal body fat and a good amount of lean body mass. And you achieve that via exercise. And that'll do things like reduce blood sugar levels, so improve your insulin sensitivity, so prevent you from getting metabolic disorders, which in this country are huge. Obviously that's like one of the biggest health factors we have in this country. And then also do things like, your immune system is largely reflective upon your exercise habits and your genetics, but you can't really change your genetics, but you can change your exercise habits to try to reflect the healthiest immune system you can get. So those things interact with each other.
Do you think, what do you think about like the body type stuff? Like you were saying, like the best thing you can do is be lean, but what about like the endomorph body style versus the ectomorph body style? So
some people have a harder time at that than others, right? And so there's been a lot of people have contested the idea that you can really split body types into 3 types. It's a variation of those things. Predominantly, it's a spectrum, and predominantly what we're thinking about in terms of the body types is composition of muscle fibers. So how there's like we have fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers, and the way to remember them is the fast twitch are the ones that tire out quickly, and slow twitch tire out like less quickly. They're endurance muscle types. So there are genetic like polymorphisms that lead to the expression of more fast twitch muscle fiber versus more slow twitch. So people that have more, and this is predominantly by a gene called ACTN3. And so, for instance, you could do 23andMe if you're familiar with that site, like get your own, genetics done. And like for instance, I'm homozygous for this ACTN3 gene, and that means that my body is it's very capable of putting on fast twitch muscle fiber. So I have a mesomorph type body, right? And I know that's true because when I lift weights, I get big, and when I run, my body doesn't like to do that so much, whereas people that are people that are a mesomorph or an endomorph, tend to have more of that sort of like lean body mass capacity. But in that theory of body types, it's also thought that they're also more likely to put on fat as well. Maybe that's true. I don't know. But then on the other spectrum, the people that have the slow twitch muscle fiber, and they're good at doing things like long distance running and endurance type activities as well. That's more of that metabolically inefficient muscle fiber, if you know what I'm saying. It takes less energy to run it. Yeah.
Nice. So, just to kind of wrap up, like, how do you take that research stuff and apply it to your own life?
Oh, right. So there's that part. So I know that, it's hard because like really, I feel like the more I do research, the more I just the research just fulfills my own beliefs of what I think anyways.
Oh,
like, I mean, that kind of happens, right?
Prophecy.
Right. Yeah. Like I tend to think that like you should be exercising and you should be healthy and you should be doing all the things that, all those sort of things anyways. What do we got? Some questions here?
What do we got? Back. Oh man, I can't see.
Yeah, I can't see that far either.
Good luck. College is business, and oh man, I can't read. Can we zoom in? Here, I'll let you. How do you do this?
You might be able to see it better.
Yeah.
College is a business and 10 years and profitable. Yeah, I mean, there's that part as well.
Oh man.
That was back on the college question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where are we at?
Multi thing. Yeah, you were talking about like how you apply that stuff to your life.
Oh yeah. So I definitely, I'm definitely trying to find ways constantly to be, a healthier, more efficient, or efficacious human being.
Of course.
And I know that I don't see, one of the things that some people might think they could do is take commercial probiotics.
Yeah.
I'm probably, prior to doing the research that I've done, I would have thought that was a viable strategy for altering your microbiome. I don't think it is long term. I think you need to do things like, exercise, maintain low lean body or a high lean body mass. So like weightlifting, I would prefer that dramatically over things like cardiovascular exercise, which really metabolically doesn't do much for you or for losing weight at all.
Really?
No, that's super. So here's one of the biggest misconceptions people have about exercise is that cardiovascular exercise is what you need to do to like burn fat, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, there's a misconception of how we think about exercise. And that's that, in my opinion, exercise is a calorie repartitioning stimulus rather than a calorie expending stimulus. The reason being is that your metabolic rate adapts to the exercise that you do when you're doing most traditional cardiovascular exercise. You tend to eat more, and if you do enough of it, your metabolic rate will kind of slow down. And that's that slow pace, like running sort of stuff. You know what I'm talking about?
Kind of.
Whereas, and this is why I think weightlifting is more advantageous to long-term weight loss, because really what matters is a caloric deficit, right?
Yeah.
And so if you try to shape a caloric deficit just by doing cardiovascular exercise, I think you get body adaptations that make it more difficult for you to lose weight. Plus you get satiety signal, or like hunger signals that make you want to eat more. And you wanting to eat more makes it very difficult to adhere to a diet. And the most important thing in a diet is adherence. That's like the critical thing,
Being consistent.
Right. It doesn't matter if you're like low carb, high carb, low fat, like whatever it is, if you're on some like West Beach diet, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just that you need to create a caloric deficit really. And it needs to be long-term. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to be not too high. And what resistance exercise like weightlifting does that's very effective is that it increases your body's ability to store things, to store glycogen. Glycogen is how your body stores glucose. So one of the things that happens when you break down muscle tissue and it rebuilds itself is that it increases the amount of glycogen that it stores and it increases the amount of mitochondria. And what that does is that it's repartitioning calories that you consume from being put into fat cells into your muscles. That's why you can see bodybuilders that are on the extreme end of the spectrum. They can eat 10,000 calories a day and still have, they get down to ridiculously low percentage body fats because they have so much lean body mass, but we're in the 3-4% body fat range. And they can eat just pizzas all day long and not have an issue.
Why? Is it because like different body types kind of burn the calories differently? Like maybe like I'm thinking like if you have a higher metabolism, wouldn't it make sense that if I eat a lot of food, let's say I eat 3,000 calories of food, because my metabolism's burning through it so quickly and like I'm pooping it out, maybe I'm only getting like 20 some hundred out of those 3,000.
So your body might be more efficient than somebody else at
Yeah.
consuming calories. Part of that has to do with your bacteria.
Yeah.
So like your gut, there's things that your body needs that it doesn't really produce, in at least not in like efficient amounts. And a lot of that comes from those commensal bacteria we talked about earlier in the gut. For instance, short chain fatty acids, acetate, butyrate, and there's another one in there. Forget it, but yeah, basically 3 of them, and those are really good for you. Like for instance, butyrate. You can kind of get into some foods like butter from grass-fed cows. There's a lot of tributyrate in it. And what butyrate does that's so effective is a variety of things. One is that it's kind of it helps like prime anti-inflammatory processes in the body. It also acts as what's called to delve too far into it, but an HDAC inhibitor. So basically it increases epigenetic expression of things in your body. And epigenetics are how the environment influences your DNA to affect gene expression. So like, it's really interesting because like, there's a lot of things that your body produces that comes from the bacteria in your body, and those things are dependent upon your health. And that's predominantly from like consumption of fiber.
Yeah.
So there's one of the things that you could do is eat more fiber, but we already know that anyways, right? So yeah, different body types will use calories in different ways, and that's dependent upon things like microbiome, your environment. Your immune system also interacts with that, because we know that there's immune interactions that happen with your body that prevent weight loss and vice versa. For instance, a lot of cytokines can have effects where it might promote insulin resistance. And conversely, when you have a lot of body mass, you can get an increased production of some of these cytokines that can, in turn, also have inflammatory effects. So they say like some diets are inflammatory. It's not necessarily the case. I think that what is actually the case is that when you just have more fat mass, that can be like inflammatory. And then it's I think it's important also when we're talking about this to remember that like inflammation is not bad, right? This is probably like one of the things that I've learned actually since I've been doing my research that I did not know at first. I think I went into it with this conception that, these are the things that are bad for you want to avoid in your life, right? In terms of like dietary effects and effects of your environment. One is what's called oxidative stress. Have you ever heard of like people taking antioxidants, things like that? And then the other is inflammation. Like inflammation's bad. Oxidative stress is bad. Let's hit both of those because those are actually really good like things to think about.
Yeah.
So like in a very like rudimentary sense, we know that inflammation is good. For instance, when you're exposed to like a virus, your body wants to mount inflammation to get rid of it. Also, when you have like a cut or a bruise, your body heals it by promoting a local inflammatory response. But here's like the important thing. When you exercise, you lift weights, your body also produces a local inflammatory response. And that inflammation is necessary for hypertrophy to occur. All the positive adaptations like protein translation that happen in muscles when they're growing occurs because of inflammatory growth factor associated signaling proteins. So if you don't have...
That's what it is to like get swole, like when you're swelling up. Like your muscles are getting inflamed.
Yeah, you're getting local edema, and then you're getting like swelling. You're getting a lot of water, and you're getting like lysed muscle cells, maybe to some extent, and then you're getting inflammation. And we know that if you give people like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, it can reduce hypertrophy. So like, you need inflammation, right? It's like, but what your body needs to do, and this is what's crazy about exercise, that exercise causes a ton of inflammation. It causes a crazy stress response. If you looked at like cortisol levels, which are basically, what we look at as stress, when you're exercising, your cortisol levels go through the roof. Your blood pressure goes through the roof. Your cytokine levels go through the roof. And if you looked at the body of somebody that was exercising chronically, you'd be like, whoa, this is like not good. But you took it out of context from what was happening. There's a paradox there that we don't fully understand about why that's happening. But, so that's one of the things is like not to fear inflammation. But what's more important is the capacity to regulate our body's inflammation. I think that might be what exercise does effectively, is that it like primes our system to have, okay, we have inflammation, but then you get the counter-regulatory mechanisms within your body to activate. And that's called that's the anti-inflammatory pathways. And so learning how to balance those things is something I kind of think about a lot. And, exercise does it. And also things like diet that leads to me not putting on a lot of body fat does it as well. So there's that component. And the other thing that I've learned is the idea of this oxidative stress or oxidative damage. So you've probably heard of the idea of people taking like antioxidants like vitamin C. Have you heard of that? Like, right? It like pops up all the time. So there's a chemist called Linus Pauling who had this idea. He got a Nobel Prize for something, I think it was unrelated to this, but he came up with the idea that you should just basically pump yourself full of vitamin C and it'll help cure cancer, do all these things, because we see oxidative damage happen around the site of cancers. And uncurbed oxidative stress is not a good thing. So what is oxidative stress? Let's talk about that for a minute. So what it is it happens when you exercise, for instance, as well. And what it is so you have all this, glucose surrounding your cell. It goes into your cells and then your body chews it up and then it creates energy off of it in the form of basically ATP. So when you have that happening at a high rate, at a high flux, there's a probability that you're going to produce these things called reactive oxygen species. And these reactive oxygen species cause oxidative damage. And what they do is they bind to things like proteins to affect protein function, which is not good. And they bind to DNA to basically interfere with DNA function. This can lead to things like...
What is it doing to the protein? What's it doing to the DNA?
So to the protein, it does a thing called glycosylation, which is what's called a post-translational modification. So what happens is that your body makes these proteins, and then the protein needs to do some stuff. And it does normally these post-translational modifications so that it can, change the function of the protein, which is very clever from nature standpoint, because it's like one protein can do a lot of different things now. But when it gets glycosylated extensively, you can have things happen that basically impair function of the protein.
Is that because it wants you to slow down? Like you're using too much? Because you're saying like if you burn too much glucose too quickly, like you're obviously doing some like really intense stuff. So maybe like I'm wondering, is it trying to slow you down?
So not necessarily. So it's more of it's just giving you energy for it. But what the reactive oxygen species are doing when they're unchecked is that they're interfering with how all that protein and how all that stuff works, and that leads to cell death. So that's basically the end point that matters, is that if you have too much oxidative damage, two things happens. One is you can get cell death, and the second is you can get your DNA doesn't work the way it should. And one of the things that can do is lead to expression of things called oncogenes. Onco is kind of the root associated with oncology or cancer. And so when you have too many of these cancer genes coming off, this is when tumors and things can develop. And the reality of the situation is that your body is probably producing cancerous cells all the time, and that you have the capacity to clear it out. The reason being is that you have the effect of apoptotic, so like cell death things are happening, and you have like your own inside antioxidants that do things. So now when you take supplemental antioxidants, they usually informs your body doesn't necessarily use, and most of it just gets peed out anyways. What really matters is your body's own antioxidant system. The most important one of those is called glutathione. And glutathione is what is kind of the master regulator of oxidative stress within cells. And so it used to be the case that we thought that, okay, oxidative stress is a bad thing, which the stress aspect kind of is, but these oxidative processes or reactive oxygen species aren't necessarily bad. So you need them for things like long-term memory. So we know that if you block them extensively, you block memory formation. So they have like essential signaling roles in cells as well. And it's learning. So it's like your body has it in play. It's doing things when it's normally. So it's not that we just want to pump ourselves full of antioxidants to get rid of them. We want it to be working, but we want it to be working the way it's designed to work. And taking supplemental antioxidants isn't the answer to healing that system or to making it as most efficient as possible.
How can you do maintenance to that system that regulates?
Honestly, exercise and diet.
Yeah.
Exercise, diet. It all, it's like, I think humans fundamentally look for complicated answers for simple questions. In reality, I think a lot, and it makes sense, right? Because the world's complicated, the body's complicated. That's why I have a job and I will only scratch the surface, and my brain is not even designed, as no human brain is, to be able to understand how systems work in concert. So in science, we do this thing called reductionism, where I just, you find your system and you tear it down and you find like, oh, if this goes to that and that makes this and then this happens, right? When reality is happening like in concert on this huge level. So there's this really complicated thing that we really can't understand, but then we like try to overcomplicate it more and more and more. But I think what we need to think about is like, what are the things that you can do that have the largest impact on you? And it's not taking like a crazy supplement regimen or anything like that. It's, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's maintaining high lean body mass, low body fat, and then frequently exercising as well. And that's kind of the formula of things there. And that can be achieved in any number of ways.
That's crazy. So what do you do for diet and exercise?
Oh, good question. And so I am a huge fan of, so for diet, basically I eat a lot of ribeyes and a lot of jalapenos, as you know.
Hell yeah, dude.
You know, that's really my favorite thing. But, you know, what I think about, I eat palatable foods that I enjoy as a person, right? And I've gone through phases in my life where I've thought about, you know, I was a vegan twice in my life. I've been like variations of vegetarian, pescatarian, you know, both from ethical, but also what I thought at the time was health related standpoints. I've done a lot of things. And what I've realized is that what matters more than anything is what I can adhere to over time. So having like consistency, but also variety, if that makes sense, like consistent variety. And it's usually I eat a lot of vegetables, and I eat a lot of
vegetables.
Yeah, I eat everything. Yeah, vegetable wise, I'll eat it all. A lot of vegetables, and usually a lot of fatty meats. You know, and that's what my body handles well to be able to maintain, you know, the high lean body mass, low body fat thing. So a lot of leafy green vegetables, a lot of root vegetables. I guess maybe kind of a paleo diet, but not really, because I'll eat milk and dairy and stuff like that, and beans, like legumes. You know, and I try to do what I think is, you know, best for my body type. But that depends, you know, really, because it's you know, here's an interesting point. Have you heard of the blue zones before?
No.
So there's been this research into the idea of like longevity, right? We all care about that. Like we all want to live long, healthy lives. And one of the way to look at this is to look at different cultures around the world or different, you know, parts of society and see where do you get the most amount of centenarians. So like people that live over the age of 100. And so somebody's able to identify 5 zones where this happens at. And what you can then ask is, what are the commonalities of these zones? You know, like how do they eat? How do they live? How do they live, I think, is probably the most important factor, and that's that they're pretty social and happy, and they don't take life too seriously. You know, they have low stress usually in societies. And then the other one is, how do they consume food? So people have mistakenly used this situation to try to harp on vegetarian diets or like vegan low animal byproduct diets, which I think is complete bullshit, because basically what's happened is they're trying to use these epidemiological studies about a very self-selected group of people and then find their commonalities and make judgments to all people off of that. But yeah, these people, they tend to eat a lot of legumes, a lot of beans. And some of them, they tend to eat more carbs than fat and protein. But then there's like curveballs in there, because there's one place called Sardinia in Italy, where they all eat processed meat, they drink all the time, and they smoke cigarettes, and they live old as hell. You know what I'm saying? So it's like the commonality, though, I think is not so much in the diet, but in the social aspects of it, A, and B, the fact that they're self-selected populations that have bred together for long periods. You know what I'm saying? They like kind of have, you know, they've, for whatever reason in those areas, they've just, you know, they live longer, but there's not like outsiders coming in there. They've been like selectively breeding amongst themselves for a long period of time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of, you know, one of the things I think about in my research, I think probably most scientists that work in the life sciences think about are things like longevity. That pops up a lot.
Yeah. You know who David Sinclair is?
Yeah.
He's on Joe Rogan's podcast. Yeah. He talks about like aging as a disease. Do you think that that's like a realistic viewpoint?
I think that's completely not a realistic viewpoint, and that's my opinion. And to me, aging is the natural process that happens in all bodies. So if it's a disease, why does every single person have it? Right? Like, you know, there's this idea, have you heard that quote, life is a sexually transmitted disease with 100% mortality rate?
Yeah, dude.
That's such a good quote.
It's so good.
But I think that, so aging is a necessary part of existence, you know, and it's
You don't think that it's possible to reverse, though, with like genetic like mutation or anything like that?
I think we can slow down the aging process, and we'll talk about a few different ways. One of it being calorie restriction, you know, which is a commonality in some of those blue zones, definitely, is that they don't eat a lot of food. Eating a lot of food increases the amount of flux that happens through those oxidation pathways we're talking about and inflammation associated with the food, because your body does mount a low-grade inflammatory response anytime you eat. which is crazy. So it's not like foods are inflammatory, but your body naturally does that anyways. So if you're constantly stuffing food down your face and your body's always metabolizing food, you get an increased probability of things like errors happening that lead to cancerous cells and things that can damage telomeres. You've heard of that, like chromosomal endpoints. So all bodies basically are set up such that we age, right? And the problem is not, I think once you reach a terminal point in the aging process where you're not gonna go backwards. And to me, this is like a physical law of the universe. It's like entropy, right? You're losing information, and once that information's lost, you're not getting it back. You might be able to like slow down aging. We got questions here. What's going on?
Well, let's touch it.
So you might be able to slow down aging a little bit, I think, but I don't think you're reversing it once it's happening. Maybe, I don't know. I am a scientist after all, so I think that it's hard for me to say it's definitely not happening. It could happen, and we just don't know how yet. But the point is, and I think this is always fascinating about the human body, is the human body needs like stimuluses, needs like a stimuli to be able to survive or to be able to adapt, right? So like your body's basically set up in the right conditions to be able to grow and to have like a lifespan that is consistent across all humans. You go through childhood, you go through puberty, that leads to all this activation of new hormones and things that transform your body a little bit more. And then up into your 20s and 30s, parts of your brain are still developing, like parts of your brains like the prefrontal cortex. I tend to have a more extremist view and think that your brain's developing throughout your whole lifespan, and it's contingent. It develops in ways that have been evolutionarily useful for to be able to solve problems at specific points in your life.
Like at specific ages.
At specific ages, right? Like why old people tend to be more associated with crystallized intelligence and wisdom, and young people more with flexibility of intelligence.
And people are like more agreeable, like the older they get.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And
so your brain's is constantly evolving.
I think it is. That's my opinion.
Cool.
People tend to say
it would make sense. It would make sense.
Yeah. And people tend to say that your brain evolves into like your 20s, but I think it tends to be a lifelong thing. And I think at some point, usually in your mid to late 20s to 30s, your body basically at that point, if you don't do things to it, it basically just dies. It'll like age and age and age, and it'll start to like, you'll lose production of things like testosterone and other hormones. And, you need to put like mechanical stimulus and food into the body and things into it to keep it going. We know, like, for instance, if you, broke a leg, you're in a hospital for a period of time, and that was a long period of time, and people aren't moving you around, you get muscle wasting and things, right? Your muscles need force to be applied to them to be able to produce factors that tell them to exist. Otherwise, they degrade, or they go through what we talked about before, cell death or apoptosis. So back to the original question, is aging a disease? I think that's an interesting way to phrase it that allows, it's like a selling point, or it's like salesmanship, right? Because it sounds really good. But I think that aging is a very natural thing that we all have to go through, and it makes sense. When you think about it, it like makes evolutionary sense, is that you live long enough to reproduce a bunch, to take care of your kids enough so that they can then have kids and take care of themselves, and then you're no longer needed. You go away. But with that, you can do things to your body to make that process as pleasant as possible, right? Peter Attia? No. He's like a medical doctor that's he's really interesting to say. He's got this great idea of longevity, about how to maximize like your lifespan. He's not one of those like transhumanist, I'm gonna live forever types like Sinclair might be, or Kurzweil, Ray Kurzweil. If you read his stuff, he's similar in that regard. But his idea is that that aging is basically, you need to approach it like it's a sport. And you win that sport if you're 85 years old and you can like roll around on the ground with your great-great-grandkid, or you can walk up the stairs and take care of yourself at that point. You lose if you're 60 years old and you don't get there. And that happens by, exercise and doing all those things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So like, I'm just kind of thinking about the metabolism thing. Like, so snacking's not a good move as far as like a long-term way of consuming like sustenance, because of that inflammatory thing. So so do you do like big meals? Like how do you, I'm curious of your diet and how you eat throughout the day.
So COVID has changed this a little bit. It's just hard to get on schedule. That, Ideally I'm on 2 meals a day. Ideally I'm at noon I have a meal, and at nighttime I have a meal, and I try not to eat too close before bedtime, so I'll eat a few hours before I go to bed and then stop. I prefer less meals. I think what's more important than any of that is what you can do to maintain that golden ratio of high lean body mass and low body fat. So yeah, in my opinion, like for me, the easiest way to do that is just have 2 meals a day.
They're big meals?
Yeah, they're pretty big meals. Usually my lunch is a bigger meal, but I try to have 2 big meals a day. But I think honestly, that just allows me to keep the fat off. When I've had diets where I've done snacking or like the 5 or 6 meals a day, it's hard for me to do that. And because I like to sit down and have a big meal. That's what I prefer.
I'm similar. It's interesting. I'm happy that I'm so close to you. Actually, it's like I'm doing shit right. That's cool.
Yeah, that's important. Let me touch on the exercise because I didn't get to that one. So like, how do I approach exercise? I really, especially, so I think that changes over the course of the lifespan.
Yeah.
And we got somebody who keeps asking questions.
We'll get
them after that. So I think the exercise strategy kind of needs to change across the lifespan. So what is the developmental time point you're in at right now? And how can you work best for that, right? As you get older, like, what do you lose? You lose explosive power. You start to lose muscle mass when you're in your late 20s to 30s. And, I've read some crazy statistics. It's like a half a pound a year or something absurd, which it sounds apocryphal, so maybe it's wrong, but you need to. So to me, I need to do things to preserve my muscle mass. You get shifts in things like testosterone production that happens. We know that lifting heavy weights with low reps increases testosterone production, so I do a lot of that. Things that increase explosive power. There's really there are things that you can do like plyometrics to some extent. There's one thing that you can do to really increase explosive power that all the studies have shown, and that's power cleans. So I do power cleans a lot, and because it's progressible. You can only box jump so many times before you get out of the zone of resistance exercise more into like cardiovascular exercise, right? Because you can probably box jump like 20 or 30 times, pretty quickly if you do it a lot. Whereas like cleans, you can stack weight on it and get stronger and stronger and more powerful off of it. So I'll do that stuff. And then obviously you got me into Jiu Jitsu, and I do that freaking all the time now. I'm like
you
obsessed
telling
with
me you
it.
choke people for fun, Jiah?
Man,
My
so
goodness, you animal.
It's so good. I like that. And then, I do a lot of mountain biking. I like crazy mountain biking.
You got me into that.
Yeah, exactly.
The first time I've ever tried that, it was with you, and that's hard.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's it's a lot of it has commonalities with jiu-jitsu. We'll touch upon that. Snowboarding, rock climbing, things like that.
We gotta climb.
Yeah, we do. So I tend to like so to me the anchor of it all, the like me training for old age is happening in the gym, and it's happening with heavy weights, and it's happening with cleans and things like that. And the other things I think also add to it, like jiu-jitsu helps with your flexibility and your strength as well. Like the positions you get into, you need to be flexible. Yoga, I'll do yoga a lot too, actually. I'll do pretty much anything really, to be honest. But I tend to be inclined more towards like dangerous sports or dangerous like sort of things. Yeah. And I think that's, we kind of at the beginning of this whole podcast talked about stress. And I think a lot of the things that we've learned, remember we talked about like passive and active coping? It's one of the things that like doing high pressure, high danger potential sports has for you, I think, is that it teaches you to think effectively and clearly under high stress situations. And it shows you that you can control that high stress situation. So when I'm pointing a mountain bike down a hill and I'm at like and I go to like a bike resort where you have like, maybe like a 10-foot drops or things like that, or big jumps you have to hit, and you're going at high speed, you're covered with protective gear. But like if you fall, you're going to get hurt. You're constantly solving a problem at, it's a high stress problem, and time like slows down for you. And same thing when you're rolling with somebody and they're really good, especially, and they got good pressure and they're like taking your breath off of you. You got to constantly be thinking about how you can get out of that and how you can solve this problem. And to me, it's like one of the things that has most affected of us in modern civilization is that we do not have real stressors, like for the most part, right? And I think real stressors are things that you need to activate the full entirety of the human experience.
Dude,
man,
that's so powerful. It's like core to my ethos.
Oh yeah, sure. I know we're on the same. It's one of the things we're really connect about, and why we like the same things.
Yeah.
I think
There's a Socrates quote I want to run by you. I want your feedback on it, but it's like one that I hold really close, and it's something to the effect of like, it's a shame for a man to grow old without knowing
the potential of what his youth like could be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like what an athlete he could have been.
I agree with that completely, because I definitely, I had I didn't think about it at the time. It's funny how like life changes, and like as you get older, you start to realize that things that you didn't like at the time were actually really good for you. So I was definitely in a position where I was kind of, I played sports when I was younger, and I didn't always like the sports that I played, like football and things like that, but they set me up to have that philosophy. And I think back about a time, I was like, man, I was miserable at the time having to like smack into another human, which is not like, I'm not a violent person. It's not really something that, I would have like gone after myself if I wasn't put into it, but I appreciate it now as a human being. Right. And it's, the older I get, the more I wish I did more of those sort of things when I was younger. And I did a lot of them, honestly. I've always been into stuff, but, and it's definitely, I'm 37 now, so I feel it more than maybe not really. Sometimes I think I do. Sometimes I think I'm at the peak.
Yeah, some days you wake up and you gotta put some WD-40 on them joints.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Let's answer.
We got somebody my man is going in. I'll read him. All right. So, 100 years old equals amazing genetics. Has Jiah read about or heard of David Sinclair's research on aging? I think we touched on that.
Oh yeah, you did. Did you see that or something?
Yeah. And then telomeres is something David Sinclair's research is on specifically too.
He loves
your brain is constantly adapting to not die or be a burden on your tribe. In tribe days, you need young warriors. You need old wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all the brain is making sure you adapt well to your environment. One of the best guests, 100%. Agree on the stress. Also, MTB, noob, and ride motorcycles. Time to slow down. Ultimate mental workout. Ride a motorcycle, Jiah. Always on the edge.
Man, I've been thinking about that a lot recently. I really like the baby idea of getting a dirt bike.
With skydiving too, it kind of breaks regular life. Stare death in the face. It's one of the ultimate stressors. Have you ever gone skydiving?
No, it's so fun. I'm terrified of flying.
Yeah.
I fly a lot, but I'm terrified of it. You've gone skydiving?
I have.
You would have, yeah.
Yeah, you would have.
I want to, because it's the scariest thing. I can't imagine anything more scary than skydiving, so I want to do it.
Yeah, it's that's kind of what got me to do it, because I'm like, I was in one of those situations where like I'm in there like. Anyone that's like my state of mind, even you right now, probably has to feel this way with the COVID thing. Like, we're locked down. Like, I need something to break this thing. But I need something really big to like shake the foundation here. And that's what I want. Like, I was feeling at the time when I got invited. I'm like, I'm in there. Let's go. And I remember I tipped my dude, and I'm like, do a flip out of the plane, and he did.
So you took it to the next level. Yeah, on top
dude. I'm like, bro, like
crazy.
I've always been like that. Like, I play games on like hard difficulty the first time around.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I want to go straight.
I'll roll with the best guy in the gym in Jiu Jitsu. Like, I want the full experience. Like, get my adrenaline like maxed out today.
Yeah, well, to me that's like part of like, that's one of my whole philosophies. Like, I want to have the full experience of life, right? Because you don't get it. My philosophy is that it's probably lights out when you're dead. Like, I think that it's like that when you're dead, it's just all the system shuts down and that's it. Like, what's it called? Our commenter on here, our awesome commenter.
Yeah, avocado.
Avocado. I love avocados.
Yeah, me too.
All right, has commented on it.
He said, "Do it, go skydiving."
Do it. Yeah, it's shocking. Is what we were talking about.
Just like pushing the limits and always taking the full experience.
Yeah, because it's like you get one shot and then it's lights out, right? And it's like, and I think that makes sense because I think that's what our bodies are like. We're meant to just basically reproduce, take care of our kids, and then let our kids reproduce, and then that's it.
So are you like an atheist, like straight up?
Yeah. So in terms of, I'm an atheist in the sense that, well, no, not really. So I recognize that there's a possibility for some intelligent group of things. It seems weird to me that it would be like a single thing that just exists, but something that exists outside the bounds of normal reality that is the reason why all these paradoxes like infinity and everything exist in us, because it's like our reality, those things matter, but maybe in another reality they don't, so they're really not a paradox at all. They're just built into this reality. And I recognize that there could be some sort of like external intelligent group of beings or whatever that could have created us. We could be a simulation, could be any of those things, right? So in that sense, I'm kind of agnostic. I think most religion is a construct that was created based upon like passed down verbal traditions, like moral tradition, and that it serves religion as a whole. I think like serves as like a group cohesion factor. It's like developing factions, so you can basically take the resources and powers of another faction, and it helps extort the masses out of their resources so that a controlling few can take that.
Oh, it's
I
like,
don't go down to
kind
that
of,
further.
but that kind of goes in like the Pareto distribution that like the top 10% have 90% of the resource.
Yeah, it works a lot. And what that really is that's a normal distribution, right? Is that in a normal distribution, most people fall in the middle, and this works for a lot of behavioral traits. And then you have extremes. You have extreme on like a bad end and extreme on a good end, if you want to put like moral value on it. Yeah, I forget we're going through all this.
Yeah.
There's so many good sidetracks that you can go down on these topics.
Your tributaries are solid.
Oh, nice.
That's awesome.
I like what this was talking about like what our ancestors did. That is something I think about a lot, and I don't think about so much nowadays, but when I was in undergrad, I was really into evolutionary psychology, which is the idea that we have a primitive brain living in a modern body.
Yeah,
right?
man.
And then,
touch on that. I want to hear your thoughts on that.
All right, so first off, I'm going to lay down the biggest problem with this field is that it basically asks questions that aren't testable. Because we can't go back in time and like do these experiments on our ancestors. There's a principle in science. So in science, we have this. So science has changed throughout the years of what it's been, right? For the longest time, we basically had this philosopher that came along called Karl Popper, who like formulated modern day science, and he came up with the idea that science needs to have testable hypotheses. So if a hypothesis is non-falsifiable, it's not a good hypothesis. But that's just one way of thinking about science, and that's changed a lot. Like now we're more into this idea that you can't have non-falsifiable or discovery-based sciences. And what evolutionary psychology does, it's difficult, is they create, they're looking like post hoc, like this thing's already happened, and now we're trying to describe it after the event, but it's hard to kind of test the mechanisms of how it's happening. The reason evolutionary psychology also is so good, what I think is important to think about is that there's this Nobel Prize winning ecologist named Nicholas Tinbergen. And a lot of the questions that we ask as scientists, but we also ask as people, is like, how does a thing happen? Whereas evolutionary psychology, what I always love is they ask, why does it happen? So we have this idea of proximate mechanisms, like how does this happen? And evolutionary psychology is so interesting because it asks, like, why does this happen? And that distinction is really important, right?
100%.
Oh, man.
You got a UPS package?
Oh, we got a package. Scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, for real.
So basically,
It's like the cats.
Yeah, let's not talk about that. So basically, what that says is, so we talk about this period in evolutionary psychology, this environment of evolutionary adaptedness. So you're adapted to a specific place and time, and it's an interesting framework for thinking about like psychological traits. Like it makes you think about, okay, I can think about why or how depression happens. Like depression is an imbalance and blah, blah, whatever theory you want to throw out there. But what we don't think about enough is like, why does depression happen? Like, why do people get depressed? Why is it so prevalent? And you can go to, one of the ways you can look at it is you can go to cultures that have never been modernized, that have never faced I don't want to say burden, because there's both burdens and there's benefits of living in modernized society, right? We have a lot of good things, we have a lot of bad things. But you can go to like some of these hunter and gatherer tribes that probably still mimic to some degree the environment of evolutionary adaptedness. And then we can look at we can start asking things like depression. Why? Like, why do you think we have depression? What would be your intuitive? Why do you think people have depression?
I think like there's a multitude of factors, right? Like I think depression can be something that is accumulative, where like a lot of bad things just start happening, and you're just like, maybe you didn't get your promotion at your job, and then like your car took a shit, and now like you have to do like a bunch of this stuff just accumulates, and like your girlfriend leaves you or something, or like maybe it's a big thing that hits you, like your mom died, you know what I mean, your parents died, or like you lost your job. Like there's huge big things that make you kind of reassess frame of reality because they're so big. Like that could, something that upsets your reference of what reality is could definitely like throw you into a depression, in my opinion. But there's also other things too, like you can do it to yourself. You know what I mean? Like someone who maybe isn't very goal oriented could put themselves in a life situation where maybe like maybe they're an alcoholic, or maybe they just smoke weed all day and just sit on the couch and play Call of Duty, and then like eventually the depression starts sinking in when they're looking at their peers that are kind of getting ahead of them. There's a multitude of factors that could do it. I'm just speaking on like some examples that come into my head.
Oh, that's fantastic. And it's but I think also you're getting at the more of the how than the what. Like, why do humans as a species experience depression? Like, because very well we could have evolved to not have depression. You know, so it's like, to me, the way what evolution, what the,
like, why is it still in the code?
Right. And that's like, to me, that's the framework at which, again, it's a non-falsifiable sort of thing, but where evolutionary psychology, I think, is so interesting, is that it asks the question of like, well, okay, well, why did we develop this? Like, is this a modern thing, or have humans always had depression, like, to some extent? And there's the idea of like melancholia and things. Like, when you look back historically, yeah, people probably have always been able to get depression. And so let's think about what you're talking about again, with like, you know, when you have this distribution, or this bell curve, right? And you have extremes. So in the extreme situation, so most behavioral traits exist on this continuum. So most people go through a period of depression at some point in their lives. So what does that depression do? To me, I think what it does is that it helps create a reflection backwards that allows you to reevaluate your life. And in a normal situation, for, I don't want to say normal person, but for many people, that leads to reflection. And reflection is good. You know, it's like nature's way of telling you that you're barking up the wrong tree and you're doing something that's not going to get you to basically have kids. So for instance, right?
That's awesome.
And that's the evolutionary psychology answer to it,
doubt.
right? And then it's like, and think about that, though. Like, think about how many people you see with depression. Like, you might have a friend that's like, man, he's gotten laid for like 2 years. He sits inside, plays video games all day, which is fine, or, you know, but then it's like that coupled with eats like shit, doesn't exercise. Like, obviously that makes sense. That person's depressed. Like, they're doing all the wrong things in life to be able to achieve the ultimate, I don't want to say the ultimate, but basically life's kind of goal for us, which is to reproduce, like, you know, whereas, so, you know, to me, that's the normal cases. Like, you know, you or me, like, I might develop a depression. I've certainly have had like bad depression at points in my life. And, you know, when I think back about those times, it's like, man, it's because my life sucked in those times. Like, I was doing all the wrong things in life, and it made sense. But then because things exist on that continuum, you have extremes. And because of that, you have people that'll never get depression. You'll never hear about those. But then you also have the people that get major depression, and that's like pathological depression. And that's why like extreme things happen. Like schizophrenia is a great example of this. So people that have schizophrenia, they're more likely than the average person to have people that are in creative domains in their life or in their family. So it's very common that you hear of somebody with schizophrenia who, like, their uncle's is a creative director somewhere, their aunt's a famous author or something, or their brother is a painter. See what I'm saying? So it's like schizophrenia, it might also exist on this continuum where in the extreme you get schizophrenia, which is kind of a creative, weird way of looking at the world. Whereas on the non-extreme versions, you just get elevated creativity. And that elevated creativity is something that can lead you to solve problems in life that make you more likely to reproduce. And because of that, you pass on your schizophrenia genes. And then just based off of probability, some people down the line are likely to get schizophrenia in that gene line. You know?
Yeah. Man, that's epic.
Yeah,
that's
that
epic
field
stuff,
like
man.
changes the way you think about a lot of things, right? And then you think about like, how can you use that? So then, you know, the next question is like, how can you use evolutionary psychology to change your life? You know, so you can think about things like, okay, what did our ancestors do differently than us? You know, they had pretty tight social groups, you know, so maybe social isolation is not a good thing. And we know that it's not a good thing. Like, you want to have a pretty tight social group, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's epic. Yeah,
I feel like they should just
yeah.
be in on the
Oh,
conversation
man, for
with us,
real.
man. We're getting...
What does he say? I love evolutionary psychology, especially in terms of mate selection. We have depression because we are too smart. It's a side effect. Too much time to think.
were chimps that got too smart. We never had to select based on the code. Lack of depression until recently. Strong disagree on the concept of depression. It doesn't have a purpose. It's a byproduct of modern life and never being selected against.
So you can answer. So that's I don't want to say it's easy to answer, but you can look at pre-modernization and just look at, do people talk about depression back then? I don't know the answer to it. I mean, I'm pretty sure that has come up. Melancholia is a good example of it. There used to be cases I'm talking like Hippocratic time where, this has been described as a phenomenon. You can also look at hunter-gatherer societies and say, do people get depression there? And I think that it's the case, that it's true. I think it's probably more extreme in modern society because modern society has new stressors that are placed upon us that people don't have the coping skills yet to be able to use. And there hasn't been enough time to really be able to develop those coping skills and have that, in the population. And for it to be in the population, it needs to be selected for.
Yeah.
You don't have to have good coping skills per se nowadays to reproduce.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking too, kind of touching back on what we were talking about in the early part of the podcast with the gut biome thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like some organisms are more predisposed to be, subordinate, and that has to come with some depression versus someone that's like an alpha kind of type,
Well, being an alpha is not great for you either, though.
Yo, for sure. Everyone's gunning for the top spot,
so
man.
There's this researcher that's really famous in the field called Robert Sapolsky, and he did this such cool work. There's a great video of him doing this, where he basically went out to Africa, and it's either baboons or chimps, I forget, but they're like dominance hierarchy based. I bet you whoever this is knows what it was, but basically went out there and took these blow darts and basically so he would go out there and he would find like the group, right, and see who the alphas were, who the betas were, who the omega was, who all the in-betweens were. And it wasn't always the case that the omega, like the worst in the tribe, was the one with the most depression. It's the top guy, or not depression, the most amount of cortisol. So he would look at like cortisol as a proxy for stress, right? It was oftentimes the alpha and the beta. It was like the ones that were vying for the top where it all came at. So it's like, there's, with great rewards comes great trials, like sort of thing, right? It's like they get access to the most reproductive possibilities, but also it's stressful being at the top.
Yeah, man, that's powerful stuff to think about.
Yeah.
I think, like even like dogs are like the same way with like I follow a lot of like stuff where I see articles about like I love like Nature is Metal Instagram. You ever see that thing?
No. I do want to check that out though. I can see where it goes.
Yeah, he puts like really cool articles up a lot of the time, and you can just look into just why certain animals are the way they are. And it's just like these hierarchies just exist in the genetics, That's why like you have like if you let a dog like go out into the wild and like over time it's going to become like a feral creature and it's not going to be civilized anymore.
Oh yeah.
And it's, if it gets in a pack, they're going to have that same hierarchy that
they still do that, which is crazy.
What I mean?
Yeah, it's not that far removed. There's this great study that happened. Have you seen this Russian dog? I forget what town it's in, but there's a bunch of homeless dogs in this area in Russia, and there's this grad student that did a study on them, which is why it's so well documented. And they were basically, so they're dogs that became feral. And what they did is they self-aggregated into packs. And I think this is so cool. Not only do they aggregate into packs, and the packs have their own hierarchy and structures, but they learn how to solve problems faced by modern society. So like they were able to like take the subway, go to different locations. Yeah, they go back to their home. They're able to like follow crosswalks, stop, see oh, this changed its color. Don't go yet. I'm gonna hit by a car. Or that's what all the people do. I don't know why. And then they go across, and they're able to like come up with these really clever ways to trick humans. Like they'd send like the cute dog, the one that didn't have all the fucked up like scars on his face, would like go and beg at a human while the human was holding like a hot dog, and like the badass dog would sneak up behind and snag the food from the human. So they like do setup tricks for people to be able to steal food from them and stuff.
I've seen that where like a dog will like fake an injury.
Yeah,
for help too.
Which is cool. And dogs are so interesting because they're the one species that we've selectively bred for probably like social parasitic features, right? So think about it, like dogs are kind of social parasites, right? Is that they exist, they do things basically so that humans will give them food.
Yeah.
Take
Well,
care of
I
them.
think it's like a symbiotic relationship, right? Because we keep them around because they give us like a buff in our mood, right? Like the dog's happy to see you when you go home from work, but you had a shitty day at work. That dog's giving you something and you're feeding it.
Yeah, it's a symbiotic relationship
exactly.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah, they definitely are.
Yeah, I don't know. I like me and my girlfriend have had this discussion before. Like she has a dog and he's adorable. But I'm not a big fan of having pets because I think like it kind of goes hand in hand with my diet. Like I think everything should have a fair shake, and not everyone should have my belief. Like the world wouldn't work if everyone was like me. But this is just the way I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean dogs are cool. I love dogs.
Yeah. I think like I had a pet like bird when I was a kid and it died, and I'm like, this thing should have been out like in the wild. Like why did it die in my hands in my house? Like it was a big moment.
Well, it's a tricky part because like dogs, they'd probably do okay, but not as well as like a natural like its ancestor would in the wild.
100%.
And you see it. Oh, you've seen it. I mean, Puerto Rico.
Dude, there's so many
dogs.
Dude,
so many
I have a
freaking dogs.
hashtag like on my Instagram. You can look at it. Whose dog is that?
Oh yeah.
For real, I have a whole thing. I'll show you after
And
this.
some were so good, man. When we went to Puerto Rico, we had this dog that kept coming to our house. Mooney was its name. We figured out, and we were like, the dog was so cute. And there are all sorts of dogs on the street, and Mooney was the only one that would come. And Mooney would like sit outside of our door, wouldn't come in the house because probably knew not to do that. But it was so cute, and we gave it so much food. And then we were like, this dog is so smart because for whatever reason, it's the most well-kept dog. All these other dogs don't even mess with us at all. They're like, man, where does this dog come from? Did somebody just lose it or is it outside dog? And we looked in the guest book, and everybody in the guest book was talking about how amazing Mooney was. They're like, this dog like figured out that this house had all these Airbnb people coming to it, and then if it just came over there, it would get food.
That's epic.
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
That's so funny, man. Dogs are social engineers too, man.
Yeah, they really are. Yeah, I mean, well, they do a lot of clever things too. That like, have you seen the studies about dogs with humans' eyes? Like dogs sense a lot of what you do by the way your eye or your facial expressions are. So you can do these studies where you can, dogs I think are the only animal that's really able to do this, where you can basically put something like a treat in a cup and have a bunch of cups there, and then teach the dog that if you look at something, like you look at the right cup, the dog goes to the cup that your eyes gaze at. So the dog can read your eye cues to be able to do things in the world.
That's cool.
Yeah, dogs are cool.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, they're cool.
They're mischievous too. I remember your stories.
Oh
of
yeah,
your husky.
Oh yeah, waiting until we're gone to do a thing that we never told him not to do, but clearly we wouldn't have liked, and he just figured out.
Yo, it's so funny, man.
But
That's crazy. So yeah, man, let's talk a little bit about the mountain biking and stuff. Like, what got you into that? Like, what got you into mountain biking specifically? Because I went mountain biking with you, and it was like, dude, you're a beast. Like, you were like riding circles around me, and like I hadn't ridden a bicycle in like ages up to that point. But man, like you're legit.
I love bikes, man. Man, you know what it is? Is it's like we all have a thing as humans that anchors us to some sort of experience in our life that brings us back to that experience, I think. And for me, it's bikes. For somebody else, it could be playing football. Like maybe somebody grew up playing football with their dad at the beach, and that's the thing. It just brings it back to it. And then what's convenient is when it's something like bikes is that you can infinitely go into it, right? Like I can get better and better and better and do crazier and crazier shit the more I do it. And with bikes, I think it was from having I won't go too far into it, but having like a not ideal childhood, like moving around a lot and stuff and never having control. But then when I realized when I got into biking, I got into BMXing at one point, I was like, man, I have control of my life right now. I can get on this bike and I can go anywhere, and that's the anchoring experience, is the freedom that happens when it's like, I can get on this thing and the world is mine.
I remember having that feeling as a kid, like a teenager, when I got my bike with my friends. Like, it would be like, all right, where are we going today? Let's just bike 20 miles away. Let's just do
Isn't it crazy? And
Yeah.
there's a lot you can learn, and it's definitely taught me a lot about life as a whole. Like, one of the biggest things I learned from biking is how you can change how your hobbies change how you see the world. So when I was younger, I was really into like freestyle biking, and I'd be driving down, I'd be in the burbs or go to the city or wherever, and everything was a feature. I skateboarded, I did rollerblading, and all that shit when I was younger, and it was like, you know, the world all of a sudden became like a playground. And I remember thinking about, and this left like the longest lasting impression on me, is that, you know, when I was a kid and I looked at stairs, it was different than the way an adult or like a normal person looked at stairs. To me, I'm like, man, I could probably jump off that, do a bar spin, or do like, you know, maybe I can hit a tail whip off of that. It's a little crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like, the world is a function. Things exist in the world as tools for you to use, and we're so like narrow focused on things having a specific purpose. And I think what bikes did for me is it unlocked this like latent creativity that I had that's always been there. And it's like allowed me to see the possibilities beyond what a thing is, which is definitely what I think is probably like my key trait as like what I bring to the world.
Yeah.
You know, and it's
I feel like similarly to that, like I never really got into BMX that much. Like I did a little bit and I ate shit too many times. And I was like, this ain't for me. But parkour is like my way, where like I can look at an architectural thing and be like, oh, this is what that's for. Trust me. You know what I mean?
And it's completely so I think it's helped me with science and everything too, because it's like I'll look at a problem and not be and I consciously I've done it for so long that I'm now, it's like, what is that phrase? It's like unconscious competence, where it's like I don't even have to think about it. I see a problem and I instantly can see beyond the constraints of the problem and see like, well, that's just how like somebody conceptualized it, but what else can lead to this problem? You know, there's a great test. The way you test this with humans, I think, is so cool. Is you know, it's like, it's divergent thinking or creativity. Is like, if I give you a brick, what can you do with it? And then give you a minute to tell me all the things you can do with it. You know what I'm saying? And it's like the most linear thinkers will just be like, oh, a brick, you put it down and you build and then you build and that's it. Or somebody else might be like, you know, and this is what biking has allowed me to do, is be able to see something like a brick and be like, well, I can use this brick, I throw it through the window, I can use it as a paperweight, I can break it in half and crumble it up and then turn it into sand and then like play in it. Or like I could take this brick and I can, you know, mash acorns with it to get a thing out of it. Like, it becomes a new tool in my hand. You know, that's what biking has done for me, is that it's like, it's changed the way that I've seen the world, where now like everything is a problem with an infinite ways of looking at the problem. Yeah.
That's epic.
Yeah, biking's the shit. And it allows me to do the thing that, you know, we've been talking about, which is basically having, you know, something that's, I think it's one of the important things in the existence of any human, is to develop mastery of a thing. You know, at least one thing. Like, I think as part of the full human experience, you gotta in your life at least be an expert at one thing and know what it's like to be an expert at that thing, right?
Yeah.
You know.
Well, what constitutes being an expert too? Because I feel like I'm a jack of all trades. Yeah, answer that question, and then I'll
have you ever heard of that, like these like 4 stages of competency?
Hours.
That's kind of it too. Yeah. But there's this idea of this 4 stages of competency. We should know, like, anything that's like broken down into 3 stages of, or 3 pillars or whatever, is like contested, but I think it's a good separation. And that's the idea that there's, you know, when you're a beginner, you have what's called unconscious incompetence. And that's the idea that you don't realize how bad you suck at a thing. And then, you know, so that might be like the new white belt at Jiu Jitsu or something, right? And then you have a phrase of what's called, you know, you have this next, like this longer term phrase called, what is it? It's conscious incompetence, where you where you realize how shitty you are and you need to get better at it. And for most people in their lives, honestly, no matter what they do, that's just kind of, they linger in that area, right? It's a combination of unconscious incompetence and conscious incompetence. But then eventually, once you start to get really good at a thing, you get this this conscious competence, and that's when you know that you're good. And then what the master has is what's called unconscious competence, and that's where you don't have to think about it. And that's where I feel like I am on a bike. That's where I am on a few things in my life at this point, where I don't have to think about performing the activity. I can just point and rip, you know. And bikes do that for me. Snowboards do that for me. There's, you know, music kind of does that for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, man, like the only thing I feel like really like unconscious competence is like with guitar, when I'm like noodling.
Absolutely,
over, like, a
yeah.
loop.
You're not thinking about scales and shit, right?
I just can feel, kind of. And then I know people that are way better than me at guitar too. So like, it depends what I'm doing in music, right? Because like, if I'm trying to learn this crazy sweepy thing, I'm the fucking conscious competence, where I'm like, fuck, I know this sucks, or incompetence, conscious incompetence. And then I look at these other guys that are just god tier, you know, two-handed tapping craziness.
Right.
But I would say if I had to describe where my mastery lies in music, it would be at performance and evoking like an emotion out of my audience, and knowing how to make you feel what I'm feeling.
Right.
I think that's
And that just comes with practice, right?
Yeah,
You know,
100%.
It's a combination of
because you need to
practice
be
and,
good to
Yeah.
do that.
Right. It's like what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, social facilitation, you know, and that inverted the arousal curves and everything. Like you need both of that, you know, and then you need, you know, mastery also involves, you said 10,000 hours. So that's like a really contested thing nowadays, right? So the 10,000 hour rule was developed by these two psychologists in Florida State called Erickson and Charnes. And they came up with this, they did this great study where they looked at all these masters of things like chess and violin, and said that on average, a master has 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, which is about 10 years. Now, deliberate practice is a very specific thing, right? Deliberate practice is just noodling. It's usually supervised, structured, coached things where you're consciously working to get better and better and better.
Intentional practice
intentional.
versus fucking around.
Absolutely. Now, the problem with that theory is that when they came up with it, they looked at what's called kind domains. So kind domains are things that have structured rules that are embedded in them. So for instance, 10,000 hour rule applies to things like, you know, maybe chess, you know, because chess has a series of rules and it has a structure that's based off of it. And there's positions and things that you know. But then we also have in the world things called wicked domains. And wicked domains are things like art. So like just doing art for 10,000 hours, there's no real like, you know, let's say you're trying to become you know, you focus on songwriting or something like that. Just writing songs for 10,000 hours isn't going to make you an amazing songwriter. In fact, some people can do that in like a year, you know, figure out how to write amazing songs. And that's because that domain doesn't have structure to it in the way that the kind domains have. So it like depends, you know, and I think that's part of the beauty of the self-mastery approach is that it's like to have the full experience, not only do you want to know what it's like to be in a kind domain, but also like the wicked domain, you know all of those things.
Yeah. What about, I believe that you can also lose the mastery too. Like if you don't practice enough, you can lose your competence.
Yeah.
I think that's 100% a thing too.
Yeah, probably.
Like, yeah, because like you always think like the old kung fu master's like the best guy, but he's in the dojo still every day, man. He's still teaching.
Yeah.
Like that's why he can still kick your ass.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah, you got to still do it. I mean, it's like use it or lose it, but you know, there's nuance to that, which is so interesting. So you have these two different types of memory that we probably a lot, but we have what's called procedural memory and episodic memory. Episodic memory is your memory for like facts and things like that, whereas procedural memory is your memory for things like, you know, things like, what is the phrase? Like playing tennis, you know, playing piano, all those sort of things. What's interesting is when people get things like Alzheimer's disease when they get older, they tend to lose their episodic memory, not the procedural memory. So if you're a master piano when you're younger, that's the sort of thing you might keep when you're older and everything.
Yeah,
still.
it's like riding a bike. Kind
Yeah,
of
it's
thing.
like riding a
Yeah.
bike is a great example, and I think that's
Yeah.
why that happens.
Yeah, I think like it's so hard because like when I think of a master, I'm like, you need to be able to push the limits
Yep.
of what you're capable of, right? So it's not just being competent at one thing. But yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, it's not just about being able to like maybe the first song you learned is something that's the thing that's at your fingertips is the riding the bike. It's just kicking the pedal, right? But like the masterpiece that you were working on your whole life to recant that, I feel like should require constant sharpening of the axe.
Yeah, it can. Because like your magnus opus in life, that takes a lot of. You have to
Yeah.
be, you know, you have to be in it to really be able to do it. I think about it in the context of, you know, I set out a goal when I was younger, which was to be able to. So when I finished my PhD, my goal for my 30s was to be able to figure out how to like write, produce, record, mix an album. And I didn't really start writing songs until I was like in my late 20s, right? And I'm 37 now. And then I basically had to spend like a good bulk of the past, you know, less than 10 years figuring out how to do all that. And last year, is kind of when, you know, me and the guys and the Spooky Forest guys got together and we put together that, and we really started working on that album. I felt like I really had the skills to do that. And I think about it a lot now. Like, I don't think I could ever do, I don't know if I could do that again. Like, it takes so much of your attention, it takes so much of your focus that it's not replicable.
That's where I can relate to that so much. There's so many things like that I want to pursue now that I see like, oh, that's a thing, and it's accessible to me now because of some new innovation. It's gonna take me a year to get to where I want to be. Like it right now. Like, I know it's gonna take me a year to get to as competent as I want to be to achieve the thing in that
you need to do.
You know what I mean?
You know, there's I don't know. To me, there's something like powerful in that. Like, as a human, it's like it's important to have that, because otherwise, it's like kind of we're talking about with the muscle stuff later. Like, if you don't stimulate it, it goes away.
100%.
You know, you got to do it, and sometimes it sucks. You got to fight against it, and sometimes you got to force yourself to do it. You know, you got to do, as Joe Rogan always says, turn off your inner bitch.
Bitch switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's definitely powerful stuff. Yeah, I think Avocado's got like a bunch of other stuff. I'm just gonna grab from a random place because I can't tell where we were. All right, apparently the difference between domesticated dogs and we're gonna skip that for the dog thing. Jiah, what bike do you ride? Enduro, like downhill?
Enduro, but I'm about to buy downhill. I'll ride the Enduro bike at the downhill park, but I'm looking for a downhill bike right now. So if you have any recommendations, let me know.
What about Dunning-Kruger incompetence?
Oh, right. So this is like the idea that, you know, this is basically reflects the idea about, if I recall right, people thinking they know than they actually know. So like a lot of times people that are non-experts will think they know a lot more about a subject.
Yeah,
and this to me is this also, I think this like addresses the unconscious incompetence thing. And we see that now in modern society so much because people become armchair experts on things all the time. Like, how many people tell you about, vaccines are bad for you? And it's like, oh, cool. You're an immunologist that's done research on vaccines. Tell me about it. It's like, oh, no, I watched like a YouTube video on it. But like, it definitely is bad for you, like 5G or something like that. And it's like, maybe it is, but I don't know that. How do you know that?
Yeah, how do you know that exactly?
Yeah, that's a huge issue in modern society, actually, that we probably didn't have
agree.
before. And that's access to information.
No doubt, like false information, right? And how like the echo chambers propagate it.
Well, this is all right. So let's build on that. This is the problem this is one of the fundamental problems of humans, and this we kind of talked about earlier, and that's that. Like, so I had this experience where I was taking logic when I was formal logic in college, right? And I walked in on the first day. The guy puts up this like tautology, which is basically like if this then that statement. It's like it's something like Socrates or what is it like? All parrots can talk, Socrates can talk, therefore Socrates is a parrot. Like some dumb shit like that, which like, obviously there's like a flaw in there as is, but his point was that the way that we think about logic as humans often, or even when we think about it at the formal college level, is not about the soundness of the logic. Like, yeah, that's nonsensical. Like, it doesn't matter. Or like, inductively, like the sun's going to come up. Just because the sun's always come up doesn't mean it's going to come up tomorrow, but the sun's going to come up tomorrow. So what we don't think about enough is how sound the statements are that people make. So like, it's very easy for somebody to go on YouTube and get a convincing argument sent to them and then be like, yeah, that's true. And that's because we have all these weird things like pareidolia, like the idea that you can, humans are really good at making patterns out of random nonsense. We're so good at that, right? The best example of that is astrology, right? So think about astrology.
100%.
Like, you just look at the stars and you're like, oh, well, that's clearly a Big Dipper. I mean, the Big Dipper is like the best example because it looks like a Big Dipper. But some of those things, like, you're stretching. Like, you're like, oh, that's a belt. That's Orion's belt. Okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So we're really good at doing that thing. So, humans are good at finding like crap, like correlations and, presuming there's causation through it. Or things like finding information that appeals to their own beliefs, which is really the big issue there, right? Is the humans find information that appeals to their belief, and then they try to give that information to everybody else, and then they act as if it's like true. And then you can be an expert on it. For instance, you can have like health experts, tell you like, no, that is not true, and they'll be like, yeah, but it's true. And that's probably one of those constructs of modern society. Because back in the day, like, you had access. All right, so there's a benefit there too, right? The benefit, the same thing that made that happen, is the fact that it used to be the case that knowledge came from authoritarian sources. So before the advent of like modernized religion and things like that, people didn't really read. Like reading wasn't really a thing. That kind of came that followed religion being able to like formalize text, and then, you know, monks and spiritual people learning how to read, and then eventually somebody coming along and being like, well, everybody should know how to read. And then, you know, but at one point in time, like the information you got was based off of what a few leaders told you. So it was like authoritarian acquisition of knowledge, and they were freaking wrong probably for about a lot of things about the way the world works.
Yeah.
Now there's just so
Earth is
much
flat, man.
Earth is flat, and everybody's like, oh yeah. And, you know, and then all it takes is like one person to come along and be like, really? You know, but then everybody else doesn't even question it. But in hindsight, it might have made perfect sense if you were there living at the time.
Yeah.
You know, and now we just have so much information that it's weird to see that coming back, like there being like flat earthers.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's all about, but that's probably like, you know, we've been
all
talking about a modern construct of society.
Yeah. Yeah, people are crazy.
Yeah.
Flat Earth.
All right, let me see. Look, he had a couple other things really quick I just want to touch on. Being able to talk through your instrument is an insane feeling. Can Jiah talk about the concept of flow when it comes to working on things? Does he get flow on his MTB? Get a drop seat 100% for mountain bike?
Oh, I got the drop seat for sure.
Oh yeah, do a custom build.
You'd enjoy it.
So there's a psychologist name. His name was Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I never know how to say his last name. He's got a crazy ass last name, but he came up with this idea of flow. And flow is what happens when you are sufficiently challenged and sufficiently skilled enough in something that you enter a state of timelessness where just the world melts around you. And it's like,
hell yeah.
yeah,
dude.
performances
I've been
does it
there.
for me nowadays. You know, when I first started like performing live, no, that I was not in a state of flow. I was a state of freaking being stressed. What Ewan brought up earlier, the idea of being in that that inverted U shape for arousal. You need to have a little bit of arousal to get that flow effect, but you also need to be really good at what you're doing to do it. So like mountain biking, snowboarding, I get that a lot of things in life, and that's
Jiu Jitsu even gives me that sometimes.
I'm already starting to get that. I feel
Yeah.
like sometimes, and it's
Yeah.
weird because
Like, once you start like stacking like your stuff that you like to do, and you know the counters off of it, like, that's
Yeah.
like flow rolling's valuable for that reason too. Like
Yeah.
you like what you can do with like your girlfriend without making her mad, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
That kind
yeah.
of stuff. Just like, oh, let me just try these things. I just want to feel the combination. And once you feel it enough times, it's like the human body's pretty, you know, like it's not a fluid thing. It's it's the shape it is. So you know you're gonna fall the way you fall on one body, like on the next, unless a dude's missing a leg or something.
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
yeah. It's a meditative. To me, it's like it's almost meditating without having. Have you heard of the idea of like a sitting practice in meditation? Like this is like sitting doing like ohms to me, a flow state probably has similar neural networks that are associated with having being really good at doing a sitting practice. So it's like meditation without having to do the drudgery of meditation.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, the idea of the flow state is fascinating, and that's, you know, that to me is part of the human experience. Like you want to be good enough at things to know what that's like,
experience that, yeah.
because it's cool and it's good for you. I think it's very good for you.
I feel it's the ultimate like protagonist feeling. Like it makes you feel like the main
yeah.
character. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it does.
Like
Well, you are, yeah. It's
that,
like
that, and I feel like video games can be. I'm thinking about it. Like video games are such an easy way to get there.
100% agree.
You know what I mean? Like if you're on an easy difficulty and you're just shitting on like the adversity. Like there's games, I don't know, like Avocado. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. But like Dynasty Warriors, you know what that game is?
Yeah, I never played video games.
No.
Before. I should.
Yeah, I mean, wait till you're old. Like
Yeah.
for real, that's like where I'm at with it. It's like I can do that shit when I'm 60. Like
That's a good
try.
point.
I only play really like important games to my mind now. Like I won't just pick up every Call of Duty that comes out. It's got to mean something. But anyway, in that game, like your character is way stronger than 90% of the bad guys, so you can just hack and slash through them.
Yeah.
And you know, eventually, like you learn enough like these combos where it just feels like you're flowing through, and you get dopamine hits out the ass. Those games are so addictive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's why that flow state's so easy to get in those games.
Yeah, that's a great call. So it's like a shortcut to flow.
Yeah, honestly,
way.
and I'll tell you, there's video games where it's difficult to get to a flow state, like in Street Fighter or Marvel vs. Capcom, my personal favorite. You need to understand combos and how they work to flow into different attacks and stuff.
So that's where you need expertise.
That shit takes hand-eye coordination.
Yeah.
You need to actually be pretty good.
Yeah.
It's not as hard as mountain biking though.
Yeah, mountain biking is it's like a real world video games. You think about it, you're in first person, you got
Hell
this thing
yeah,
in front of
dude.
you, and it's and it's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
But-
Man, that's so cool to think about that. Yeah, and it's such an addictive feeling. That's what keeps you coming back to it. You know what I mean?
Oh,
That's what
yeah.
keeps me coming back to like wanting to perform for people with music.
Yeah, it's like
Or
empowering
jamming
feeling.
with other people. You ever just jam with someone and like the vibe's good? Like
Oh,
even when we
yeah.
were like writing the song like the other day. Spoiler alert.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, man, it's crazy when someone has an idea and you can just stack on it and it's like, like both of our competence can meld and
Can
create
meld together.
something beautiful.
That's the best experience to me, and that's also when you're dealing with somebody that also has that has that empathy that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's coming from cognitive or emotional empathy or whatever it is, where it's like, all right, I know what you're going for. Let me do
Yeah.
this to it.
Yeah.
There's people that I've jammed with where you could tell a lot about somebody by how they do music, right? Just people you've done stuff with is like, man, that person is only thinking about themselves right now or thinking about what they can do. They're like louder than everybody right now.
Yeah,
They're doing this
dude.
thing, and it's like
And I've been that guy. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
why that was my unconscious incompetence.
yeah.
Stage. That's my early open mic days kind of thing. Like, let's jam solo the whole song.
You could do the flip side though, because I feel like when I was
Yeah.
younger, I was so I didn't sing in front of anybody until I was like 31 or 32 years old. I'm 37 now.
Damn,
like
man,
nobody.
he's been hiding these pipes for forever.
I would
guys.
practice all the time, and I would never do it in front of people. Like when I was in grad school and I started recording shit, I would have this mobile recording setup, and I would park my car. And that sounds so stupid in hindsight. I would park my car in the parking lot where I can like see all the way around me and make sure nobody was watching me, and have like a microphone set up in there and just work on songs in there because I didn't want anybody to hear me and like my neighbors to hear me or anything. I was so weirdly embarrassed.
So self-conscious.
Yeah,
man. That's crazy.
It's so strange. So in that way, it's like the opposite, because it's like my self-consciousness was preventing my growth in a different way, right?
I've been there. In music, I'm the opposite, but I can give an example of where I've been where you were at, right? With music, I remember I would take my guitar to the park and just sing loud as fuck and just have fun. And maybe I wasn't that good at the time, but like people would be like, "Oh yeah, fucking guitar guy, check that guy out!" Like, fuck yeah. And then people would even approach me and be like, "Yeah, man, that's fucking awesome. Like you've been playing for a while," and that's cool because like that gave me a certain reaction that made me want to perform in front of people more, and like that's what made me so in love with open mics.
Yeah.
'Cause it's like, this isn't even weird now. Like this is where people go to do this. Like I want to do that, but I've been in situations where like you, I was hiding the skill forever, and I didn't want to bring it out because I was embarrassed about it. Let me think of an example. Archery. Archery is a good one. Because I was like, man, I just want you watch enough like Robin Hood stuff, and it's like, man, I'm in my basement just shooting arrows, like making like crazy like boxes. Like, thing. And I'm like, oh man, like I don't want to show people that I'm an archer until like I'm good at it, and I'm just labbing bad technique in my basement until I fucking met somebody that was like, oh yeah, dude, you should do this. This is the way that you do that.
Yeah.
I'm like, fuck, man.
Yeah,
You
it's
know
a
what I
weird thing
mean?
that we do that as humans, that we like keep things that, like, especially when it's something that's really important to you. Like you would think that you'd want to show it to the world.
Yeah.
Or something. Right? Like music was something that's always been important. And I still feel weird, like even sharing as much as like I'm very proud of the stuff that I've done with this, musically, because I've put so much effort into it, and I feel like I spend a lot of time making sure that I feel like it doesn't, like it expresses me, and I'm not trying to express like what I think people are gonna like, if that makes sense. Like to me, it feels like art. Like it feels like I'm really, really making art.
100%.
And that's the sort of thing like you would think you would want to give to the world, but I don't know. For me, it feels very strange doing. Every time I post something musically, I cringe a little bit in a way that I shouldn't. I don't know why. I have no idea.
Dude, I do that with stuff for this podcast.
For
all the
podcasts,
time.
yeah.
I'll give you an example. It's probably gonna be the next thing that gets posted. So look for it. It's episode 19.5. It's gonna be a jam with me and really the only guy I've ever taken like consistent formal lessons from.
Oh, cool.
And he's a good friend of mine, Ethan McKenna. He did a TED Talk, and he's an important guy. Go check out his episode. But like with him, I hear mistakes in the fucking jam that we did, and it's all off the cuff. Everything that I post, we do that the day of the interview. After we're tired, maybe we just ate some pizza and had some beers, and it's like, all right, let's just do this for like 30 minutes. Do like 4 takes, and whichever one we like the most, we'll just use. And I listen back, and I'm like, oh, why did I fucking hit that note? I'm like, I can hear it. Like, in the moment, it sounded great. You know what I mean? Because you're just chilling and you're vibing the situation. But in hindsight, I hate editing. That's why there's so many unposted clips, because there's so much editing I haven't done because it's painful to go through.
Yeah, that's how you get good at
100%
things.
Can relate, bro.
Like you need to. I think also that's like part of what makes you good at things. Like you have to have a degree of, you have to have that ability to be able to see like, oh, that's off. I need to fix that. You know.
Yeah, and at the same time, being a perfectionist can stunt your growth in so many ways, because if I just didn't, like, let's say I didn't post that video. Ethan now lives in another state. So I'd be like, oh, man, I'm going to have to fly to you and we have to redo this. No, man. A couple notes being off, like, the experience of having that moment is worth posting.
Yeah, you got to just jump and do it.
Yeah, man. And that's what this podcast is all about. Like, we'd had technical difficulties today. You know what I mean? It doesn't take away from the fact that this is an important moment. Like, we've shared some great information during this thing, in my opinion. Avocado would probably agree.
I think so too. I mean, honestly, it like reflects one of my favorite quotes in life, and I tell myself this all the time, is that you miss every shot you don't take. Ooh, buddy, I love that quote. I think about it. There's so many times that I go to write an email where I feel like, man, this is kind of ballsy. Not ballsy. It's not like a bad way. Like, should I really be reaching out to this person right now? It's like a new person that, like, or that I go to do a thing. I'm like, and I just tell myself that, and that solves all the. I think what's funny is that like we humans have had this, like, we develop these maxims or these like quotes for ourselves or whatever.
I fucking love them,
and they're great because like a really good quote can convey more information than the most compelling book, almost, in a way, and that's one of the quotes that does it for me. It's linguistically, it's kind of interesting, right? Because it's like the meaning in a quote can have greater impact than the sum of all the words it would take to say the same thing. Here's my favorite example. World War III will be fought with sticks and, or World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
Oh yeah, well that's part of the quote. It's like, I don't know what what weapons will be used to fight World War III, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
Isn't that great though?
Who said that?
I don't know, man. It sounds like an Einstein sort of thing. Avocado probably knows that shit.
You know who I think did it? Maybe I might be wrong. It has to be someone that was in the nuclear program. In the early stages. Man, that's a good one.
But it's a great quote because it's like, I think it's such an interesting linguistic phenomenon. It's got to be one of those like human things that we can do with symbolism that other species just can't do.
Yeah.
But this capacity to be able to like, to be able to create such a vivid picture with such a simple set of words is crazy. And that's like the power of art. Art is really, to me, art is like the best reflection of that, because that statement in of itself is almost artistic. Art does that extremely well.
Yeah, well, what is the function of art, right? The function of art is to like inspire people, like, you know what I mean? Like that's what it is. It's like a good song will cause you to feel a certain way. A good, a masterpiece sculpture will make you ponder, you know what I mean? A great quote that like, I really love quotes from war or associated with war, and a great Winston Churchill one that I really like, that always, like, I keep really close whenever I'm training, like lifting, Jiu Jitsu, whatever it is. But like, I always remember, like, I'm not done till, like, I feel satisfied, and like, there's a difference between like, I should be done now, and the other side of my brain going, no, like, we're not done. You still have like a lot of reps. So the quote I go back to is, if you're going through hell, keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great, man. That's
Yeah.
like that Joe Rogan. That's like that turn off your inner bitch one to me, is that it like, so it's interesting. So you can have the same quote, or you can have completely different quotes that encourage the same behavioral
Reaction.
response, right?
Hell yeah,
and so it's
dude.
like finding the one that best fits your, and I think maybe that's like the function of why we have, why we so thrive on quotes when we're quoting them, is that it helps you remind yourself of an important action you need to do in a way that it's very easy to remember and evokes like a sense of
it's a convenient
action.
way to compartmentalize a whole
Yeah.
feeling. Yeah. It's like a convenient little, like, oh, I need this 5 words instead of a book.
Yeah, exactly. And books are cool in themselves too. But,
Yeah, for sure.
You get more like facts and stuff out of a book, which I like. Or
Yeah, I feel like going through a book helps you ponder things too. And I haven't read a book in like God knows how long. I think like going to school for IT kind of ruined books for me in some capacity. Like I actually am reading a book with my son. We're reading a little.
Oh, that's
it's
cool.
It's a book called the Ranger's Apprentice series.
Yeah.
So I'll like read a page, he'll read a page. So
That's
that's
a good
cool.
idea.
Yeah, but I can't read for entertainment anymore hardly without like doing it with my son. It's just reading about binary ones and zeros kind of kills the vibe, man.
Yeah, you need better books, man.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we got a new person here. Will this podcast be available to replay? Sorry, I missed the beginning. Yes, the beginning. I'm actually going to edit the beginning and the in this second segment because we had some issues. But yes, there are 2 parts. You can go to my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and see the other part there. And Avocado said, I use Lubu in Dynasty Warriors. Fun game. This fucking guy. Oh, man. If you're going through hell, stop and enjoy the view of the sky. Audiobooks, Brad. Audiobooks, indeed.
Audiobooks where it's at,
audiobooks
man.
And podcasts for the win.
Yeah.
What are some good books that are fiction, nonfiction that you read?
Man, I can give you a lot on that. So
what are you on right now? Like, give me a couple.
So
that you're into right now.
what I love about before Kindle, I used to always have like just fucking 10 to 20 books on the side of my bed that I would go through.
I wish people could see this bookshelf next to you.
So now it's all in virtual format. Mm-hmm. So I like Kindle a lot because I can highlight stuff in there, and then I'll go back through what I highlight and I screenshot all the time on there stuff that I like. So I do a huge combination. Honestly, I have a huge knack for like hardcore philosophy, and we're talking everything from like, I used to like Nietzsche a lot when I was younger because that's like, useful for kids or like teenagers. It's like kind of moody in a way.
Yeah.
And then like existentialism, and then I like postmodernism and critical theory type stuff. I like Roland Barthes. That's probably one of my. He's got a book called Mythologies. It's one of my favorite things because it basically shows you like the symbolism in the everyday life stuff that you do, and he can break down something as simple as like the rituals of wine drinking or something, and come up with like, it's kind of what we were talking about earlier, how you see the world differently, and. So I'll do a lot of critical theory or postmodernist stuff because it's so antithetical to science. It's like the complete opposite. It's like all like knowledge is like constructed by consensus.
That's so cool that you round yourself like that.
Oh, constantly.
Yeah.
I constantly want to have, if I'm going so far in one direction, I want to know what the opposite of that is.
I'm with that, man.
The two things.
I try to be very centered myself.
Yeah.
I can't remember which quote got me to have this mentality, but there's one.
Yeah, it's important, I think. And
100%.
it's so yeah, I'll do a lot of philosophy for some reason. I've always been into that. And then sometimes I like pop science type books. There's a book by David Epstein I like a lot called The Sports Gene, which talks a lot about like, environmental factors that are linked to success in sports. Like what makes a good sprinter or what makes a good Major League Baseball player or something like that.
That's interesting. Can you tell me something about that book?
So like most Major League Baseball players have like 20/10 vision, which is like statistically almost impossible to have. So it's like they were either set up, like they inherently had the capacity to be able to see things with high visual acuity, and they were in the position that their parents put them in the right thing at the right time. And there's another one that's like Canadian hockey leagues. It's something like you're most likely to be born in January. If you become a professional Canadian player that came out of this one league, basically. And the reason being is that this guy found out is that January was the cutoff, so those would have been the biggest kids. So the biggest kids have a competitive advantage over smaller kids when you're just starting out in hockey. And so because of that, they were reinforced to play hockey better.
That's so funny.
Things like, the book goes in a little bit about why Kenyans are really good runners. And there's an evolutionary component to it, but there's a few different components. One being is that like running is part of the culture. Another being is having legs that function like pendulums, like having a bone structure that makes that really effective. And another is like an evolutionary argument that they had ancestors that would have to go through these rituals, like these puberty, adolescence, coming of age rituals. And one of the things being the ant glove. Which the ant glove, have you seen that shit?
Fuck,
Woo!
bro.
And so
they have bullet ants.
Bullet ants, yeah, in the glove. And the thing is that to be able to do it, I don't know if it was bullet. It was one of those sort of rituals.
It was some fucked
yeah,
up
they had
ants,
one of those
man.
rituals. And basically, what it did is that it selected for the people that would make the ritual, the ones that had high pain tolerance. So they have higher pain tolerance and all these things. So, it gives you an interesting perspective on, like your capacity to do well in a sport is like, combination of genetic factors, selection pressures, and all these other things. So I'll do that. I'm trying to think what else I'm reading.
Would you ever do that?
What's that?
Put your hand in that fucking glove.
I made earlier the claim about having all experiences in life just to have them. Maybe that's one that doesn't need to have. I can like live vicariously through watching a video of somebody else experiencing that.
For real, dude.
Trying to think what else. I like poetry a lot, honestly, which is kind of it's kind of similar to music in a way. I tend to like more abstract prose type stuff, like Bukowski. I think a lot of musicians like him, but yeah, I can go on and on with books, man. I read a lot of books. I like books.
You read any like Jordan Peterson stuff, the 12 Rules for Life?
Not really. I'm like kind of familiar with him through you and through like, Joe Rogan stuff or whatever. Sometimes he can be a little obnoxious sometimes, but
yeah, tell me about your thoughts, cuz like a lot of the stuff he says I really agree with. But I'm curious about like where you disagree with him.
So
if it's similar to where
I think people misconstrue what he says a lot, which is where the obnoxiousness comes from, because then he becomes combative with it. But he's also a good debater, which is problematic because a lot of people that try to debate him are not good debaters, and that creates conflict.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson destroys this report.
Yeah, you see that all the time with it. I think he's very easy to take things that he says out of context. I think he overly simplifies complex things sometimes, but the benefit of that is that he does it in a way that helps a lot of people. I don't like that people tend to affiliate it with like empowering the wrong type of people. There tends to be this thing that he's like empowering incel-y type people, which is like, why is that bad? Even if he is doing that, maybe they do need to be not empowered to have their like hateful ideas, but empowered to change their life.
Yeah.
So I think he's misconstrued. Usually to me, he kind of falls into the guru category, and usually gurus I'm skeptical of.
Fair enough.
So I think it's more of that than anything. But he's a smart dude.
Yeah, I think like kind of what you were saying about the reading some Nietzsche. Like he's a big fan of like Nietzsche stuff, and like some of the talks where he touches on that have helped me kind of like with things with my son, like where I was like, oh, and even his book 12 Rules for Life kind of like goes into don't let your kids do anything that makes you dislike them.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a good quote.
It's a great thing like that he touches on there. Like it's really powerful, and it's like it makes you think like, oh man, like it makes me think of my childhood. And it's like damn, like maybe that's why there was resentment here, there, and the other place.
Which is why he's effective. Like he's a good communicator, which is part of what makes him so compelling. And he knows a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
He's got one of the things that he does so well is that he's got that like the quintessential well-rounded liberal education, like the liberal arts education, where it's like he knows a lot about a lot of stuff, which I appreciate a lot about him. And he's like interested. But he's got his own demons.
100%, man. Don't we all? There's no one perfect person with all the answers.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what you do is you pick and choose the ones that work for you. And that's why I think it's important to expose yourself to a lot of different views, a lot of different angles. Even sometimes like people that, it's funny. There's a philosopher that people hate, and they won't even call her a philosopher, and it makes me even more interested in knowing about her. And it's Ayn Rand. Are you familiar with her?
No,
she wrote The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, and she came up with this like philosophy called objectivism, which is basically that you want to act in your rational self-interest. So it's like a selfish sort of. So she tried to twist the phrase selfish into something with positive association, which was a bad idea on her part because then a lot of people didn't like that. And then, she was very against like social welfare programs, very capitalistic in a way. And a lot of almost no philosophers take her seriously or call her like a real philosopher. But then again, she's had more wide reach on people than almost any mainstream philosopher in history has. You know, so yeah.
No, that's good stuff. Well, we got more information coming in. Ethan McKenna is watching, and he said Bambica, and that's an inside joke. That's awesome. Jiah, make sure you get a dropper post on your mountain bike. All right, we're done talking about mountain bikes, bro.
I got a dropper post. Droppers are the shit.
Oh, man. That's awesome. Let's talk about some other stuff. So you said you're 37, and you're still chasing like athletic endeavors, and you're like 7 years into your career. What are some things you aspire to like at the moment?
Oh, that's a great. Right now it's Jiu Jitsu, as you know. I've been doing that a ton.
Yeah, brother. We're gonna compete. We're gonna slay some bodies together.
Yeah,
me and you.
That part's huge. Is there's a selfish component of that. Being the best possible dad that I can is like my constant inspiration these days, because I have an awesome son, and I really like the idea of I don't want to say. I don't want to give my parents shit or give my upbringing shit, but like kind of correcting the things that I wasn't happy with when I was younger, like things that I wish I could have done better. So I think a lot about that, honestly. A lot of my actions are based on, like recently Case has been into kayaking. His mom's really into whitewater kayaking. And so she sent me a video of him doing that stuff the other day, and we're split, which other people might not know. And I was like, oh man, I didn't even know you could do that. So my brain immediately goes to, well, I need to learn about this now because Case is into this, So a lot of it is based around like, encouraging that whatever he wants to do, I'm not just like the sideline parent that's like, cool, I'm watching my kid play soccer. No, I want to go play soccer with him or something.
Dude, 100%. I think that, and when they're young, they're at such an impressionable age. Like, like I know because I was that age.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking for structure. Like my son is looking for structure. You know what I mean? And he wants to be into cool stuff. Like he sees me do cool stuff. Like he's like, oh, I want to be a musician. So I get him a MIDI controller. I'm like, all right, you like dubstep? Like here's the way we can relate. And it's going to take him time to kind of figure out that stuff. And then eventually it's going to give us a chance that like I can jam with my dad. So he'll get to the point where he can do that with me. And I'm not giving him a guitar because there's too many guitars out there.
Yeah.
I mean, he has the access to guitars, but like, I think just in my life, one of the best bands I've ever been in had a keyboard player, and like your band's amazing too. So you can understand the importance of having a keyboard versus like 3 guitar players in a band.
love keyboards, man.
Yeah, dude, it gives you so many more elements. So he's gonna have an easier time getting into music, I think, as a keyboard player, especially with the advent of MIDI controllers.
Absolutely.
And everything like
it
that.
helps you think about music theory and all those things in a cool way.
Yeah, I think so. And I think any instrument is easy once you learn another one.
So that's the big thing too, is like, it's like you're setting up your kid, and I feel like that too. Like I'm trying to set up my kid for success as an adult, and that's like to be happy and to feel fulfilled. Which I usually feel happy. I almost never feel fulfilled. Unfortunately, I'm always trying to work on that because I always just want more. Like I want to know all the experiences. I want to do all the things.
I wonder why is that? I'm the same way.
It's so bizarre. I think it's. So
I hate it sometimes.
You need certain personality traits in society for society to move forward, right? So like you need a lot of people to just be kind of just content with the status quo, right? Because you need like the day-to-day things to work, but then you also need people that are like pushing against that. You need people that are never happy with the status quo, which I think you and I are both like that. Even once I achieve something, I automatically am on to the next thing that needs to happen, So there's that. So I just think I don't know. I think it's like a function of like your statistical place in society and like, what your part is,
Yeah.
But it's a blessing and a curse, I think, in a way.
No doubt. I definitely wouldn't trade it for the sedentary lifestyle kind of thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, sometimes I don't know, man. It's like think about it a lot. Like, are those people really truly happy some of the times, or is it? I don't know.
Maybe they are, but it's like being boxed in, right? Like, not. I don't know. It just makes me feel like they're a cog. Right.
Right. Exactly. It's like
I wouldn't. I can't imagine myself being content as a cog in the machine. And I remember, like, in my IT job, like, there was a moment that made me decide to move to Philly and, you know, become the manager of PPK before this whole thing happened. And it was, like, I just saw someone at my job that was just unhealthy and just, like, not well taken care of. And I just, like, I saw them, and it just made me, like, think that could be me. And it was scary because, like, I went back to my desk and I just sat there and I was like, I can't fucking be here. This isn't where I belong. This isn't like this isn't where my life is best utilized in the scope of making the world a better place. And that's kind of what made me, you know, really start grinding at finding the next move. Which
is remarkable. It's the things that I think people should do more of, you know, but it's interesting because it's like, for society function, most people can't do that. Most people have to be cogs, or else the machine falls apart.
And it's important to be able to identify that too. Like, even with me, my diet and, like, the way I look at, like, the pet thing. It's like, I know no one should look, like, a lot of people should not think the way I do on that.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of homeless dogs.
Yeah, you know what I mean? For real. It'd be like the world would be an interesting place for sure. But it works for me in the way that I can justify a lot of my lifestyle, and it keeps my morals grounded with healthy behaviors too.
Yeah, which is important as well. So, yeah, I don't know, man. It's it definitely leads to, I don't know. I feel like I'm, like, constantly discontent, kind of, because of it. But, you know, I think, what was the original question? The original question was, like, what's the trajectory, the purpose? Where do we go from?
Yeah, I was just asking, like, what's your next move? But we definitely went off on a little tangent.
I don't know. It's usually just, I feel like half the time I'm just, like, chasing various cars, and another car comes along.
We're in the whitewater raft, bro. Let's go down.
That's kind of what it is.
Let's go down the river wherever we go.
There's the career thing. I'm in a point in my career right now where I could make a pivot. So it's not even 7 years. It's been like 10 years, right? Or 17, because I basically came up with the idea when. So it wasn't really high school, but I got a GED, right? So I was in, like, whatever that time period was, and I was like, I really connected the idea of, like, doing neuroscience. It just felt like the right thing for various reasons.
Just like to understand the human mind.
I just want to understand myself, like, the world I was in, all those things, and I was like, what better thing to study than the way the human brain works? And then, like, the seed for that goal came in, and that's been, like, a 17-year goal that, honestly, I'm at the point where I feel like, you know, this is the hardest thing in life, is, like, to learn when to give up on something you've worked your ass off on. Bro, right? You know, you're
scaring me with this conversation. I've been avoiding thinking about this.
Yeah, well, I've been doing this for 17 years, and I've in the past year, I've realized that I might have to give it up at some point because it's, like, not sustainable in the direction I'm going. And it's like, I haven't made the right choices to be able to get into the position that I need to be in to get to the next step in this. So it's like my options are a lateral shift into something that I don't want to do, like, you know, not doing pure research anymore. But then at that point, I'm like, well, why don't I just start fresh and just figure out a completely different thing? Which, when you've been doing something for, it's actually been almost 20 years, then it makes you be like, you know, do I have to use this? Because we're set into thinking that whatever career we develop, we have to use that our whole life.
That defines you now.
Yeah, it defines you now. And it's like,
dude, it's so scary. Like, I was working in IT for 7 years myself. And, becoming the manager of a gym, it was like, dude, you've never managed anything before, like, blah blah blah, like, people were telling me, and it's like, yeah, but, like, I feel like I felt like it was calling to me, like, it was like, it's like, you have an opportunity here to do good, like, in ways that you're passionate about. I think that's the big thing, right? If you can chase your heart, like, what you're passionate about, that's, like, the big thing.
Well, it's tricky because it's like, I don't think humans are fundamentally passionate about one thing, right? Like, that changes. It can change according to your life. It can change according to the new knowledge that you get. Or, you know, sometimes I'm passionate about music. Other times I freaking hate that I let it. To me, it's like a parasite sometimes, you know, that I just can't let go of.
Right.
My job's kind of the same way. Sometimes I love my job. Other times I'm like, man, this job is like, it's kind of parasitic. I'm kind of like a cog in a pyramid scheme where I don't feel like I'm ever going to win off of this. So...
Yeah, what's the Rogan had a guy on where he was saying, like, The only way you'll feel fulfilled is if you're working for yourself, basically, like
Yeah.
owning your own business and operating it.
When does that happen though? That's what I want to know. Like because at any point you always have, like, a business is dependent upon its clientele, right? So even if you own the business, you're still dependent upon other people. You know, I think some of it might be also. Are you familiar with Joseph Campbell?
The name is very familiar.
So he wrote this book called The Power of Myth, and basically follows this thing called the hero's journey. And it's this idea that, you know, that pretty much that mythology, so myths reflect the human condition. And the human condition is all about, you know, this transformation of self or consciousness where it's, you know, things happen in your life and you go from one state to another state and you emerge from that state the hero. And the hero doesn't have to be, the hero is often portrayed as like, you know, King Arthur or something as like a quintessential example, but it could be the everyday person that's life is transformed through it could be a terrible event, it could be an amazing event, but come out somehow triumphant and transformed on the other side. And then maybe that's like and it's almost like a metaphor for the human condition as a whole, is that we're all looking for our hero's journey and of ourselves for like what we can do to transform our life to get to the next stage.
Yeah.
You know, the problem with that theory that I've always had, and people love pulling up Joseph Campbell, is like, what happens once you get to that stage? Like in a movie or in a myth, the myth is over. In life goes on. It's like, oh, I'm 35 and I just had my hero's journey just happened. Now what? Do you have another one? Or
yeah,
you
do
know?
you have another one? Where's the sequel?
Yeah.
Damn, dude, that's really powerful stuff. Just like to give an example of kind of one of the things to kind of backpedal here, like that. I was like, it's like a burden where it's like a parasite to you, like you were saying, like your job and the music. Like for me right now, I'm battling this urge with my school bus that I own. It's like, man, this thing's a pain in the ass. It's doing nothing but like being in my way, and it's an unfinished project that I feel obligated that I need to finish, you know? And I'm at the point where I'm the kind of guy that likes to get to go through with like complete shit, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's psychological things like baggage I have from where the bus came from to where I am now, and it's just so far removed that it's like it's not even in the same context of why I had it in the first place, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to like have a reason for it and things like that.
So maybe that's like the reflection point, is like, so are you talking about like, is it time to get rid of it? Are you looking about that? Yeah, which is fine. That's fair.
Yeah,
right?
and one of the moments of clarity I had is because like, oh no, like my bus isn't in shape to do an interview that I really wanted to do a little bit ago while I was at PPK, and I was like, wait a minute, I have all the things I need for the podcast. I just don't have everything I want, because I want the bus. I want the cool background with the stickers and the fucking dope memories I have in that thing, but I don't need it. I just need a couch.
Yeah.
You know? So that's kind of like, it's kind of changing the frame of my reality of like, man, do I really need this? I can still travel and do my podcast without the bus. Do I want to?
Yeah.
I kind of do. It's the easy way out.
You got to ask the Mary Kondo question. Does it still bring you joy or bliss? No, bliss, whatever it is.
And it kind of does, man. Like
yeah.
I like the idea of having the bus a lot. And I've always it's a great creative space for me to, like, if there's one thing besides music that like I would say like I'm like the master of, it's like repurposing shit. Like, I grew up poor, so I had to figure out how to make things work like, with shit that you don't know anything.
Yeah,
same,
but
So like I want to take this bus and do with it like, it's one of the only creative outlets I have left with that. Like I have solar panels and I have like these like sections of stop sign, what's essentially like stop sign posts, but it's corrugated on both sides. Like there's holes in it. It's like a 90-degree thing with holes in two spots. And I could have bought solar panel rails, but instead I'm retrofitting those. And that's a cool feeling to me because like at my core, it's like I'm not letting these things go to waste. Like I found a reason to use these things and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm going off on a tangent.
Yeah, no, man.
Yeah.
It's just...
like there's a lot of things like that where I just was able to repurpose things, and I felt like the bus is like a cool vestibule for me or a cool vessel for me to use to fulfill that creative desire. Yeah. You think I'm fucking crazy because I own a school bus?
No, I think it's cool, man. Yeah.
Oh shit.
I think the school bus is cool.
Yeah.
I wish we got to do this podcast in the school bus, but this is cool. It's cool.
It is cool, man. And one thing about like sentimental value, right? Like I try to be a minimalist as much as I can. I don't hold on to things as much as I possibly can. If it doesn't have use to me, I don't want it. Which is why when I have sentimental value for something, I want it to be really high quality. I don't want it like, oh yeah, that bottle cap, I got that from Mick Jagger. It's like, no, Mick Jagger signed my favorite guitar, and I'm never gonna get rid of this guitar even more now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, people have that sentimentalness is kind of interesting. It's like it's a connection to a thing that no longer is, but it reflects a memory of that thing for some reason, and that memory can change over time because memories change over time, right?
And it's nice to pass that down because if you can emphasize the significance of this thing to, like, it doesn't even need to be a kid. It could be like a close friend, right? Like I've done this with a friend of mine where like I've given him something that means a lot to me, and I'm like, I can see that this is going to be in good hands if I give it to you, and because you mean so much to me and this means so much to me, I want like both of you to be together. You know what I mean? Yeah, man. It's powerful stuff.
Want to wrap up, bud?
Yeah, man. I think we've been going for a while, but yeah, Jiah, can you tell everybody if they want to see your band live, if they want to, when this COVID shit's over, if they want to hit you up for your research or anything like that, where can they find you?
I think Brad's got some links up on there. Just find me on Facebook. My name is so easy to find. If you Google me, I will come up right away. And I would love to talk about science or music or mountain biking or any of the shit that we talked about further down the road. Yeah, this is cool, man. I feel like we just scratched the surface of shit we could talk about.
I know, man. I'm definitely excited to have you on again.
Yeah, we should do that again.
We will do it again. And all of the information for Jiah is also in the description, so make sure you guys grab that as well. And all right, brother, that about wraps